see if we're ready to go, 'cause I don't see the live.
You're sitting right?
Yeah, we both are.
Did you make school choices yet?
No, we're waiting to hear back. It's about like late March.
The first one that comes back, I think, is like March 24th.
Top choices.
Well, I've gone into some places because I've action. So Bard College.
Top choice.
So Bard.
So are we live, Sean?
You're streaming, yeah. The
Okay.
channel's still down.
Oh, okay, so that's why that's not on.
I really
You're
like
on YouTube,
Swarthmore
that's
College.
what
Okay, so we're.
I applied
ready to
early
go.
decision there and got deferred, so who knows?
All right, we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Apparently we have YouTube working, but not public access television. So would all who wish join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So we have 3 proposed agenda adjustments. They're all small. Striking 8A, since there are no co-curricular nominations, and 2 adjustments to the policy section. Considering JLF-E in addition to JLF, so that's the form attached to the policy, and considering policy IKE, which went through policy subcommittee. We thought it was going to have bigger changes, but everybody's pretty happy, so we're bringing that for a first read as well. So I would motion to add the 3 agenda items that I just mentioned. Is there a second? Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, we have no minutes to present since our last meeting was only a week ago. We do have 1 warrant, which is payroll 16, so I would motion to approve payroll warrant number 16. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Okay, next up is acknowledgements. We start down here with Ben.
Ooh, that's quick. I don't have anything to say.
It's hard being on the end there.
Yeah.
I know.
I don't know.
Especially with the last meeting. Last week's meeting.
I don't have any since last meeting either.
Yeah, a week is a short time.
I'm good.
Okay. All right, next up is public comment. Do we have any public comment?
I brought a prop. So, you probably get nervous when people come with props, but anyway. I'm Shauna Goodall. I'm the president of the Riverside Education Association, representing all the educators and hourly employees at the Orono schools, with the exception of people who work in the superintendent's office. So I've if you'd generously bear with me, 2 items this evening. First off, this is not from the DOT. Mr. Eckert pointed that out last time he was in my room. The Riverside Education Association runs a scholarship fund in honor of Grover McLaughlin, who is a former educator and principal at the Orono schools for many, many years. And every year we award $500 to a graduating senior who is going to pursue the field of education in their interest sheet that they turn in. And we are always looking for ways to grow the scholarship fund. A, we want to maintain it for the future, and B, we also would like to raise the amount of money that we give, because as we all know, $500 does not go very far with the cost of books and tuition and everything. So we're doing this fundraiser, and so, you know, your support of the public schools is admirable with your service on the board, but we'd like you to put your money where your mouth is. And we have these lovely signs. This one says Orono. We also have them that say Red Riots. We are working on some Asa Adams ones, and they're $25. They're from Naughty Craft Ideas, Knotty, not N-A-U-T, you know. Coming to your email, you'll see in a few minutes will be a flyer about how to purchase one of these, and I will deliver them personally to you. They make great graduation gifts, bar mitzvah, Hanukkah, we're past that. Next year's Christmas, start of school, end of school, show your riot pride. Oh, they also will say riots. I'll send you the whole list. We also are having a chair auction, our chair festival later in the year, where some of our wonderful art students, I think Becca might be No, you're not. You're not painting a chair? Oh, are painting chairs to be auctioned off. And all that money goes directly to the scholarship funds. The association doesn't use it for anything except to give it away to our graduates. So you'll be seeing some information about that, and I look forward to delivering each and every one of you a sign, or two. Or heck, we could go wild and crazy, and you could get 3 or 4, too. So the other part, oh, and if you're out in the public and you'd like to purchase a sign, I can be contacted at sgoodall, SGOODALL, at rsu26.org, and be happy to talk with you about purchasing one of these. $25. There you go, okay. I'm sure I just violated some FCC regulation for public meetings. So anyway, the other part of this is, with my role representing the association, we are a little concerned about the discussion of the OHS PE requirement coming out of the blue without really the involvement of teachers, and we're kind of wondering where it came from. We do feel as an association that it's never a bad thing to look at graduation requirements. However, we feel that there is a system and a process in place, not only through the high school, through departments, through guidance, through our principals, but also through the district curriculum committee, on which there is board representation, and then that gets forwarded to the board. So we certainly are not saying that we should never discuss curriculum items. We just think that there is a proper way and channel to do that, and we would like to see this discussion start at the district curriculum level versus a public meeting. And I'm fortunate that I see one of my colleagues from PE here tonight, but I'm not sure if others will make it. You know, she's volunteering her time to be here. She hasn't been requested to be here, and she's here out of the goodness of her heart. And I think maybe some of the other ones will attend, and I hope maybe they can be involved in some of the conversation. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I did hear a question. I will answer the question when the topic comes up. I just don't want to get engaged in back and forth on a public comment. Any other public comments? Okay. Next up, we have presentations. You want to start, Meredith?
Sure. So we obviously have just been here, it seems like a short few days ago. So primarily just want to update you in the context of the budget discussion we're going to have tonight about some information that's impacting changes to our funding and changes to how the funding formula works. And I think that would probably be best described in the context of that discussion. But also the, I know that you guys are probably, it may be on your radar about calendar. We usually start looking at calendar this year. You probably saw we just conducted a calendar survey of parents and any, staff members also might have responded to that. We do have those results, and we'll be bringing you more on calendar at the end of February meeting. Admin's going to look at the survey results and kind of work to craft a recommendation along with staff input over the next few weeks. So more to come on that as well.
Great. Student advisors. Do you have a report or any updates?
We have
No.
nothing to report.
Okay.
Nothing new.
Principals, you want to start, Darcy?
Feels like we were just here. So just a couple of, I think our biggest celebration was our Habits of Mind assembly that was run by 5th graders. It was around a one-word edu. How do you say it, Becca? Edu. I should know that. But it's basically a worldwide activity where students identify one word that revolves around one specific thing. This year they talked about making it the best year ever to help define their goals. It was really cool and well done. So just congratulations, 5th graders. That was a great project. Oh, sorry, I thought they were talking to me. The Clink project is starting up. Our PTO is working hard to organize this fundraising effort. The CLINK program will actually match the funds that we collect, and there are cash prizes. So they've organized dates where they're willing to come around town to pick up bags if people can't deliver them to Hannaford. So we're asking people to identify if they need bags picked up, and we'll come around to get that to help with this effort. Tomorrow afternoon, we're going to be working on the health curriculum and identifying the gaps and working on filling those gaps. That will be an ongoing process. We probably won't be done by the end of the day tomorrow. Another group will be working on the science curriculum. Last year we had completed the curriculum map around the learning results. This year we've decided that we ought to start connecting the next gen science standards, so that work still needs to be done. And so we'll be working on that tomorrow. And our milk cooler is here. And within hours of it being here, the first day, people were making comments about how little it runs compared to the old one. So we're gonna save on the efficiency at least. That's all I have.
Great. The health standards, which are those the state standards, or there was the National Comprehensive Sexuality Education? Which standards are you referring to?
Both.
Okay.
So we've already mapped out what we currently do under the health curriculum learning results, but we're also gonna start the discussion of the other one as well tomorrow.
Great. Thanks. Any other questions? No, thank you.
Thanks.
Mr. Kenny is at middle school basketball game, so he has submitted a report. I think the quick version of it is lots of exciting sports, chess, spelling bee, math competition results at the middle school. Anything else we need to add at the middle school?
No, he did indicate that he would like to circle back around to some of this at the next board meeting to just highlight some things he wanted to highlight.
Reg?
Hello, everyone. Doesn't feel like there's a lot to report on. January has been mid-year exams, probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. Starting the second semester, so new courses. We focused on Step Up Day, which was supposed to be tomorrow, but we're postponing it for a week because of the projected snow tomorrow. And course sign-up. So I'll talk a little bit more in that report, but I did want to point out, Ben didn't mention it, but our hockey team is still undefeated, correct, Ben? Knocking on wood, 13-0, so that's pretty awesome at this point in the season, with a couple weeks left in the regular season. I wanted to highlight our January students of the month, and we've just started getting in the habit of also reaching out to their sending schools to let them know that these students were students of the month. So in grade 9 it was Shayla Mailman of Glenburn. Grade 10 was Chris Clement, who was an Orono resident but moved here over the summer from down east. Grade 11 was Leah Costello from Vesey, and grade 12 was Sydney Steele from Orono. And I wanted to point out that our National Honor Society induction ceremony was supposed to take place back in January, but that was postponed due to bad weather. And March 15th was really the earliest night we could find that didn't conflict with some other events. So it's been rescheduled for March 15th. Again, we had mid-year exams from January 16th to 19th. Report cards were mailed home just a couple weeks ago. We're going to discuss the following proposed courses at the next curriculum meeting: Asian literature, college writing for juniors, engineering design, intro to robotics, intro to Python, which is a programming course, and a new anatomy class. And I didn't mention at the last meeting, but a group of students approached me back in December, wanted to start a science club, and was all for that. And so there's probably 10 to 15 students that have started a science club. Todd Hillier, our physics teacher, is volunteering to advise that. and they're fired up. They had a guest speaker last Friday, Dr. Waterman, who's a neurosurgeon at Eastern Maine Med, and they're actually the ones who proposed this anatomy course for next year with Mrs. Boyd. So a group of excited students are excited about science. Step Up Day is postponed to next week. And that was all I had, really.
Great. The new courses, I'm excited to see. I always beat on the drum that the two major job markets out there are health sciences and computers, and we're addressing both of those, so that's great
really
to see.
excited about those two, and the engineering design course is also going to be a really exciting class, so hoping to offer those. Oh, the other thing I wanted to mention was course sign-up process starts actually this Friday. Students will get their course sign-up sheets, and next week will be the process of selecting those courses. We've emailed our course catalog, next year's course catalog, home to parents and to students. And we're doing a little earlier this year. We just want to get a head start on it and get an idea of what courses we actually will offer and what demand there is for some of these. So, so that's what we've been doing.
Great.
Right.
Any
Thank you,
questions?
guys.
Okay. Thanks. So next up we have, it says here the 360 evaluation surveys, but I would probably scope it even more generally to just surveys that are sent to the district. To just kind of, I'll start and then you can jump in if you want, Meredith. So by policy right now, we send out, also by the CBA contract, we send out a survey evaluating the superintendent every December. By policy, we send out an evaluation of the administrators. I think it's in May, April or May. And the board decided that we didn't want to be asymmetric about that, so last year the board sent out a survey evaluating the board in January, early February. So those were 3 different surveys. We've had, typically, it depends, we've had between 60 and 150 responses on those surveys, depending on the year and the topic. And it just, so I was thinking about doing the board survey again, but also 2 other, as Meredith already mentioned, a brief survey went out on timing of professional development days. And also in the facilities committee, there's been an ongoing conversation about ways to get input from the community. And as everybody knows, if anybody's listening, the chili supper is February 28th at 5 p.m. with babysitting, followed at 6 p.m. with a 2-hour also with babysitting, discussing the facilities and building the long-term plan of the schools. So I hope people will show up at that. But for people who can't or don't show up at that, a survey is another obvious way that PDT Architects typically uses. So it struck me that's starting to sound like many surveys. Whether it's too many surveys or not, I think is one of the questions to talk about tonight. And whether the surveys we set up, I think, have a good basis in educational administration. They come from ISLIC, the International Society of Superintendents, something. Anyway, there are 7 standards that are set by the International Society for Superintendents, so they have and they're also our goals, so they have a strong basis, but you could argue that maybe some of those questions are things a lot of people don't have opinions on. So we could imagine shorter surveys, which may ultimately turn into policy changes, but I really just wanted to get a sense from the board. How happy are we with surveys? How many of those surveys do we want to keep doing? Do we want to keep the 14 or so question, depending on the number of goals, format? Talking to Meredith today, right now in the policy we have a principal or administrator survey, but we don't have a general school climate, what's working in the schools, not working in the schools survey. So kind of free for all conversation about surveys, and they're fairly new in the last couple of years, what's working, what's not working. Meredith, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I would just say that the thing that really got me thinking about this was we were having some discussion at a training I went to with MSMA around superintendent evaluation, and so we were just talking about surveys, how they happen, when they happen around the state and other districts, and it seems like that the policy is built on the assumption that we have to have a superintendent survey in December to move forward with extending a contract at that time. But I don't think that that's the case, that we don't have to do it at that time. We could align everything and have more of a combined survey so that we're not wearing people out with surveys, and maybe get a higher response rate on the surveys that we do. And I really think also that adding just some general climate questions, about school program, can help just give us some feedback on a number of fronts. Each year there might be a consistent set we use, and then some that we add in, just depending on what we're trying to gain information on. So I think it's worthy of some discussion and consideration. I think the feedback is important for us to grow on, individually as administrators, but also as an organization on a number of fronts.
Thoughts, opinions?
So Meredith, are you looking to put some order to the surveys, so to speak? Like, it sounds like you're talking like about a set baseline of surveys that go out at certain times in the year, and then depending on need, going from there?
Really more aligning them into one or two larger surveys that happen clustered together in one survey, so that we're not peppering constantly with survey on this and that. And so that's more the thinking. But in doing that, adding in elements that really go beyond the scope of evaluating leadership.
I mean, just to put in an extreme version, we could just do one survey in May, right? And people could comment on their school, their principal, their superintendent, and their board. We'd probably have to shorten the set of questions, but that would be the extreme collapse of what we're doing. Well, it's extending and asking more topics, schools as well as principal, but it's collapsing in the sense of taking 3 surveys and making it into one.
That sounds good in theory, but in practice, that would go against quite a few principles of survey research for 2 reasons. One, response rate tends to go down pretty dramatically as length increases. So if you make a survey longer, even if you're having fewer of them, excuse me, response rate is almost guaranteed to go down. So that's one issue. Excuse me. I think the bigger issue is if you mix subjects in one survey, you're potentially contaminating the data that you get back from those questions. So just methodologically, I would think that would not be a good idea to do that. So it sounds great in theory, but methodologically it would be pretty poor practice to do.
What if instead of that, we did like one survey a month? You knew on the last Friday of the month you were going to get a survey, to fill out about something going on, and it was short and quick, and it was just sort of like you knew it was coming.
I mean, survey fatigue is a real thing. There's no doubt about that. And I think one a month would probably be pushing that pretty dramatically. That being said, are we at, what do we do, 4, 3?
We do 3 currently.
I don't think 3 is pushing the boundaries of survey fatigue in any way. I think so long as we are cognizant of keeping them relatively short in duration, and then also making sure that they're methodologically sound. As long as we do those things, doing 3 or 4 per year, at least in my view, is not a problem, so long as we meet those 2 criteria. But I think if we started to go up to, certainly 1 a month would be probably definitely inducing survey fatigue. But
because I know that part of this is because of the facilities. Like there's even though that's happening now, there's always going to be something coming up that's like the thing that's just happening right now that we need feedback on.
Well, to take another example, last year we did the kind of the core values, and we had a nice workshop show up, but it could have been nice to survey that too. So, all right, so I hear, it kind of makes sense what you say, Mark, about keeping them short. Are people happy for the 2, well, right now the board, the principals, and the superintendent are basically all the same format, which is the 7 ISLIC standards and then goals, and those set of goals vary slightly across those groups. which is 13, 14, 15 questions, some of which we've worked to make the language of the ISLIC standards a little less technical, but some of which I think a lot of people have said they don't have a lot of opinion on. Are people happy with the current format, or should we try tightening up those 14 question surveys? I mean,
it's Michelle.
Yeah.
I think we should try to tighten it up some, because I think, part of survey fatigue is the number, but also the relevance of the questions. So if I'm scrolling through and we don't want people to feel irritated with questions that they're not able to answer. I would be fine mixing some of the climate questions, especially some of the more general ones, on the board survey, if that's what's coming up next, because I feel like the climate kind of transcends all the positions here, and it might be good to get people's opinions on the climate of the schools along with some of the survey questions about the board. So I think if the two topics kind of go together, it's not a big deal. I would feel funny about asking people's opinions on the facilities and the board at the same time. But if they're two things that I think are pretty closely aligned, I think it would be fine.
So that's a vote for shortening, which I have to say is probably my instinct too.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that the last survey was a bit long. just me personally filling it out. I was feeling like, oh, how many more questions are there?
Well, and I think that adding in special topics that are really relevant to people, we had a really good response rate on the survey we just completed, and that probably goes back to your point of focused surveys that aren't mixing topics. But I also think that it was a topic that people really wanted to provide input for. So I think that having an opportunity to have some kind of survey that goes beyond just leadership is something that would help us on a number of fronts. And I think, we're talking about sometimes how to get more community input and how to gauge parents' views and feelings and the community's views and feelings on different topics. And I just think that if we can have a good survey system that they know is going to be coming as an opportunity for them to provide input, I think it would be positive for our community and for our district.
And I also think, gratuitous surveying is not a great idea. If there's a reason to survey, and then to use that information almost immediately. So survey about the building, talk about the building, survey about goals, talk about goals. Then the public sees, oh wait, people are actually looking at this and acting on it. So you can ask more surveys because you're showing a direct correlation between what they're putting down and action. So I wouldn't worry too much about these shorter, more regular ones.
So I'm hearing a vote for making the leadership survey shorter, adding in some more climate and maybe some special question surveys. So in other words, broadening the scope of surveying. Is that the consensus I'm hearing? Make all three of the leadership ones shorter, and then add in climate questions and special topic questions. Okay, I think probably this is not the place to start talking about how to shorten. Maybe since it's written in the policies, maybe that's a good place. And I know Mark is on there, and anybody else who wants to. Angie, did you have something?
Well, Michelle just said something about, where does the information go, and like how, if you feel like you're actually doing something, you'll give, an answer, you'll put your 2 cents worth in. But if you're constantly giving, and then not hearing any response back, well, what are you doing with those survey results? Is there some way, other than coming to a board meeting and having them presented, is there some way that we can, do like a little piece, out to the, to the public on the website or something like that? This is the result of the survey questions, and this is the direction we're going in, and, just so that so they know where their efforts are going. It's not just a waste of time.
Yeah, Angie, I think that's good. Also, we can even put on the top of the survey, thanks for filling this out. Here's what's going to happen. Your information will be anonymized, and then here's, this is who's going to look at it. Here's why we take it seriously. Here's why we are interested in this information. I think, a few short bullet points at the top would really help get people excited or more interested, I guess, in filling it out.
I mean, no, I totally agree with that. We haven't been able to do that with the superintendent and principal, right? Those are confidential, but the board one, we have and should make more public. And I think the climate ones or special topic ones, we can also make public typically. So, yep, so that sounds like a good idea. I mean, I didn't ask specifically, but everybody wants to keep doing superintendent and board and principal? Yep, okay. All right, so I think in the policy committee, we can talk about shortening these.
I'm happy to look at it too. I know I'm not on the policy subcommittee, but.
Yeah, you're welcome. You obviously know a lot about surveys. Anything else people want to say about surveys? All right, I think that's some helpful guidance, and we can work out the specific details. Are people feeling like it's important to stick to what we said last year and do the board right now, or should we do this after we have the discussion about how to shorten?
I think if we have things like we really need people's opinions on the building and the building meeting's coming up, then we should go for the building one. I think the board one, while important, and we should get it on the calendar and not push it out further, I think if there are other things that we really need the information on now, we can push the board one a little bit.
Okay. Any last comments before we move to the next discussion? Nope. Okay, next up, we have Orono High School phys ed requirements. So I did note there was a question about where this came from. I think the short answer is this was brought up by the student reps to the board. And I didn't feel like it got a fair discussion, so I just wanted to make sure it got a fair discussion. There's really no bigger agenda on that. But that does lead me to want to make a couple more comments. One, Shauna, you identified a process, and you're absolutely right. The only thing I would note about that process is it pretty much starts with the teachers, and it doesn't have these paths for other people to have input. So I would be the first to say I don't think the board or the district has figured out the right process for these kinds of curriculum questions, and I also would be the first to say I don't think it should be a heavy-handed top-down board. Even though I will be very quick to note the course of study, which clearly includes graduation requirements, is in the law for the board. Even despite having that power in the law, I don't think it should be a top-down, heavy-handed process. I would like to find a bottom-up process. I just think it's important that it's a bottom-up process that's not only coming from teachers. Which leads me to my next point, which is that I just want to say that the student reps have a really important role. The teachers have lots of ways in which their interests are represented to the board, from policy committees to REA rep at board meetings to JPDC. The main channel right now students are represented is through the board. And so I think it's really important that student reps be able to speak about student issues without having a fear of being called out later for the opinions they express. So that's a pretty important principle, and I hope everybody respects that principle. It's their job to speak for the students, and they're doing that, and other people have other channels to speak for them. It doesn't need to turn into singling out students for speaking up. So I hope that's something we can all respect going forward. This didn't come up during the conversation, but I also want to be clear, this is not a conversation about staffing, jobs, FTEs, or anything like that. It's not in the conversation. It's not in the agenda discussion. It's not, as far as I know, it's not ever going to come up out of this topic. It's a different topic. This is a curriculum topic, and nothing more than a curriculum topic. So I hope people aren't coupling those things as well. So in that context, it's clearly a conversation about what's best for the student, right? I mean, ultimately, every decision has to be made on that level, but I think it's easy to see that and do that when it's a curriculum question. That said, I don't know, do one of you want to talk about the ideas, or would you like me to make the case for the idea, or how would you like to go forth with this topic?
Yeah, we can just start, and I'll explain the survey we sent out and kind of what the data looks like right now. So we sent one out last spring, but the way we organized the survey wasn't the best, and so the data was kind of hard to analyze. But this year we set it up, so there was one question at the beginning, do you play a sport every season? And based off the answer yes or no, they got different questions so that we could split up the data and the graphs. So, like the first section, if previous answer was no, these are the kids who responded to the first question no, so we could see their answers to the following two questions, and on the back, for the kids who do play 3 sports every season, we can see the answers to their questions. So you know, it mainly looks like the majority of kids responded that the 1.5 PE credits has not gotten in the way of their scheduling. For kids who play 2 sports, or who don't play 3 sports, and for kids who do play sports every season. It is, for kids who play sports every season, it's a little closer than the other category, but I would still say that it's not, personally, it's not a large enough number for me to say that the majority of the student body thinks that the PE has gotten in their way.
We also included a free response questions, so students could give their opinions. And you can read.
Is your mic on?
Yeah, I think so. So I can speak louder. And so students were able to give their personal opinions on if they had any concerns about the PE credit requirements. So if you wanted to look at that, you can. And we also looked at the credits required by schools in surrounding towns. And we found that the majority of schools only require 1 PE credit. And yeah, so this survey was just to get another general idea about the students, just their ideas on this topic, mostly to see if we could possibly accommodate for those kids who play 3 sports and would like to, instead of taking another half of a PE course, take an AP class that they would like to take, or a university class.
Could you speak into the mic again?
Oh, sorry. We just wanted this survey to give us an idea of if there are any kids that we could possibly accommodate for. If they, can you hear me, Mrs. Goodall? Okay, sorry.
I don't think your microphone's working at all.
Okay. How about now?
We can come forward, but you're not getting broadcast properly.
Okay, it's all right.
Yeah, I think our general consensus, and speaking with Mr. Rulin in the spring last year, was that this might possibly be better as a case by case basis if someone was playing 3 sports and maybe had a university class lined up, but the only way they could take it was they had the PE requirement or some unusual case like that. But I don't think the survey or what I've heard necessarily warrants any dramatic shift in the curriculum.
I guess so basically what your survey showed is that there's about 40% who don't play sports and about 45% who do play sports that found that the number of PE classes got in the way of taking other academic classes, whether it was science or arts or something. Is that an accurate read?
Yeah, of the students that responded, definitely, which is about a third of our school, or less than a third. So.
Right, but yeah, of the ones who responded.
I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing, but I think it's if they play sports all year, not just any sports, right?
So 3 seasons of sports?
Yeah, 3 seasons of
Okay.
sports.
Every season.
So 40 to 45% found it was preventing them from taking other classes they wanted to take. I mean, to me, it's clearly not a universal problem, and I don't think anybody is even talking about the idea that you should prevent students from taking extra PE. But clearly there are some students that it's causing troubles, and as we keep talking about individualized learning plans, it seems to me 40% is actually a pretty high number. And you pulled in, I know people are having trouble hearing, so I'm just summarizing. So most of the districts around here require half a credit of health and 1 credit, 2 semesters of PE. Orono and Herman require 3 semesters of PE. You didn't show it, but I also know there's a couple of towns that require 2 semesters of health instead of 1 semester of health. So we're clearly on the high end, and we're on the high end specifically in the PE, not the health area. So
Some schools, I don't know if this works. Some schools also have like a family planning
Yep.
course, which focuses more on like relationships between students, and it's more of like a health class. But
yeah, that was one of the ones I was thinking about in Hamden. And I think there's one other district that does that as well, where they have essentially a 1.0 credit of health. So, I mean, for me, it's not a question of whether PE is worthwhile or important or good or whether our program is great. PE is obviously worthwhile, and one of the values we set as a district is the whole student. And I don't personally have any doubt that we have a well above average, we have an excellent physical education program. So none of those are issues for me. It's just a question of opportunity cost for that student. In your free responses, you had an example of a student who wanted to take AP Physics but couldn't fit it in. And I think that's typical, but there are students who can't take it. So it's really just a question of opportunity cost and what's the best interest of the student.
So just to summarize, because I don't have a kid in high school, so I'm guessing 1.5 credits represents 1.5 years of PE out of 4, correct?
Yes.
Okay, all right. The one thing I thought was interesting is, I think it was in the student comments, and I think it's good advice about getting the PE credits out of the way early so that when you get into the AP realm, it's not that conflict doesn't exist because you've gotten it out of the way. But I just wanted to make sure that it's 1.5 years out of 4, so that's all.
Any other thoughts on the PE? I think I am the only one who's...
How is it advised? Like, how is the advising? Is there somebody that's kind of looking at the 4-year plan at the get-go and saying you really should take PE here versus here, or how does it work?
Reg, do you want to come up and speak to that part of things? While he's coming up, I also want to just make a couple of comments.
I can't hear. I'm really sorry. I used
Sorry.
to be able to hear. I don't know what happened.
Reg is coming up. I'll wait and make comments because he's at the mic, so we'll let Reg respond.
Okay, got it. Got it. Thanks.
Yeah, and so Ben and Becca, feel free to jump in just to share your own experiences. But so through the course sign-up process, a student has an advisor, advisory groups that meet once a week, and so the discussion starts there. Students will talk to their teachers as they sign up for courses, and then their guidance counselor is really kind of the person over the course of 4 years that the student is going to counsel with about their pathway, the courses that they're going to take. So I would say the school counselor is the primary person, their advisory teacher is kind of that secondary person, and then the classroom teachers themselves are kind of that third level. Does that kind of match up with your experiences?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you can go, guidance allows you to do it however you want to, and personally I'm finishing up my PE requirements this second semester, so I had wanted, to take classes my sophomore and junior year and save PE for my senior year. And guidance, I didn't feel that guidance was specifically suggesting in either way to take it earlier or take it later, but allowed me to kind of choose for myself, so.
And I mean, so towards Jake's question about taking PE earlier, I mean, ninth grade year, I think in particular, is pretty full already, right? It's not like, you're not in the AP classes, but there's a bunch of required classes.
Well, if I'm correct, you can't, I don't know if you can take a second PE other than PE 9 during your ninth grade year. So that just leaves, you can only take them, sophomore year and on.
Yeah.
So.
Correct. Yeah.
So I'd just like to add a couple comments. I think, first of all, I want to commend Ben and Becca for putting together this information. It's really helpful to have this to help just frame the situation and conversation. I think also it's just further evidence that I think we're talking about a fairly large group of our students who excel in a number of areas. They're often all-season athletes. They're high academics. Many of them involved also in arts or other club programs or co-curricular programs. So I think that these are students who are trying to achieve at highest levels on a number of fronts. So I think we owe it to ourselves to have a conversation about how to address students that find themselves in this situation. I think that, Jake, to your point, I think Ben kind of addressed that I think that students choose to take some of their, advanced courses that are opportunities through sophomore and junior year, and then get to the senior year and find themselves, out of time to fit other things in. So I just think it's something that we can certainly take back to curriculum committee and think through and talk about, because it's not just a PE issue. I mean, it's in almost every content area. I think most teachers would say we don't have enough time for all the content that we're charged to teach or that we feel is critical to teach. So I think everyone feels that crunch for time and the credits that they have. So I think it is something that we have to think about in light of kind of personalized learning and how do we help all students reach their goals, but also get in core concepts that we know are critical and important for all students. And I think our PE department does a fantastic job with, a couple of them are here, with their coursework. They have, really engaging course offerings for students that are really going to promote lifelong wellness, which I know that those skills are different than what you're getting in a competitive sport. But nonetheless, I think it's still an issue that we can talk about and determine if we see a way forward to address concerns presented. So that's my thinking.
Anybody else on the topic? I mean, I guess for me, this raises it, and Meredith and I already were talking about this, and she just hinted at it again, is a larger question of process. I think the board's been pretty clear we don't want to be micromanaging and top-down on curriculum, but I think the board's been pretty clear that there are issues that are big enough that, especially when we serve as a channel for the multiple stakeholders in the community and also for due process and due discussion, there are topics that are big enough, and graduation requirements meets that bill for me, where the board does have a role. We passed a flurry of policies last year, of which I think 2 years ago, of which I think the biggest success is certainly the curriculum committee. I think that's been working well. But I'm just wondering if anybody else has a board on thoughts about, and as Shauna noted, there always is this bottom-up process from teachers to principals to superintendent, but those aren't the only stakeholders in the group, and students are one important stakeholder group, and really the voice they have is primarily here at the board. So wondering if anybody else on the board has a thought about processes for making sure all those voices of stakeholder groups are getting represented in the curriculum discussion.
Well, I think you're right in that right now the really not the primary, but in many ways the only formal vehicle the students have are through their two representatives to the board. So given that they've got a mechanism of one, this is the appropriate way for it to come forward. Now, whether there should be another mechanism is a different question, but for right now, this is what they have. They've done their job, I think, admirably in this case, and I think the next step in this particular case is for this issue to go before the scheduled curriculum committee meeting and to be taken up there to allow all the interested parties to engage. So in this particular issue, I think that's what we should do, and it sounds like that's the direction we're headed. In terms of the kind of larger picture, I'm not sure, but I think, Brian, you're absolutely right, that there's really limited opportunity for the students to weigh in, and this is the one, at least the formal one that they have. So I think that student reps heard concerns from students, they were diligent, did some research, brought it forward. We owe them kind of a hearing on that, and so I think the curriculum committee is the next step for that.
Okay, I'm seeing head nods. Anything else anybody else wants to say on this? Does that sound like your sense of next process?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Makes
Okay.
sense.
PE teachers, gym teachers, thank you for showing up. Is there anything you wanted to add to the conversation? Yeah, if it's brief.
Well, I've worked with a number of students who have had,
Yeah, if you can come to the mic so people can hear.
I'm Chad Kirkpatrick. I teach phys ed at the middle school and high school. I've worked with a number of students over the past year and then many years before that were in the situation where they needed a phys ed credit but also needed to take a university class or an AP class. And I can probably count a half a dozen times at least where we've done an independent study because they are an athlete. So we've worked that in there so that they've been able to tie in a soccer season with phys ed. That's their workout, and then they do some paperwork on that. So the avenue is there. Whether the students know of that or get it from guidance, I think they do. I mean, if it's that big of a pressing thing that they're not going to be able to take a university class, I'm definitely going to work with them and work for them. And I usually do the independent studies myself as a staff member. So I just wanted that to be thrown out there because I don't think that was communicated. So.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I mean, another reason to have a conversation, that's constructive. Thank you. Anything else? Okay, thank you. We'll move on to the next one, which is going to be the big item, which is the budget discussion. And I'm noticing that our state rep, Ryan Tipping, is here. So when Meredith and I had planned this, one of the parts of the state actually did a good job. They got the ED 279, which for people who don't know what that is, that's the formula by which the state tells us how much money they're giving us, also how much money we are required to tax locally. They got them out at the end of January, which I think is close to a record. So anyway, we do have an ED 279, and talking through the implications of that was one half, right? Budget has revenue and expenses. I think the main thing we're going to talk about tonight is expenses. But unlike last year, and honestly, unlike most years, we have a start of a revenue picture. The biggest piece, the state piece, is on our hands too. Ryan, was there anything you wanted to say specifically, or just here for the conversation and questions, or?
Here to answer questions, and if you want me to run through the top line numbers, I can. You've got handouts.
Yeah, we have handouts on the top line too. I mean, if you want to really boil it down, our EPS says we're supposed to spend $330,000 more than we did last year, of which the state is kicking in $110,000 more, and these are really round numbers, and they are requiring the town taxpayers to pay $220,000 more out of that $330,000. Out of that $330,000 increase in expenses, it comes from there's more changes to the ED 279 this year than I've seen in a long time, but I didn't do an exact calculation because it goes through dozens and dozens of formulas, but about 80,000 of that is increased enrollment. We have more students than we had last year. There was a change to they only count October numbers, they're not counting April numbers. Whether that helps us or hurts us long run, I don't know, but this year we ended up with a net increase in student enrollment. So about 80,000 of that 330 comes to that. Off the top of my head, I think it was about 120,000 of that came from increased SPED. You may remember the way special education works. Since we spend more than the state formula, it's a continuation of effort rule, which means what we spent that was approved by the state 2 years ago is the amount they fund us for this year. And since what we You look at me funny. Am I getting that wrong, Sharon? No, okay. So basically, we spent about 100,000 more 2 years ago, so now we're getting that increased by about 100,000. There are a couple of other things that happened. The CTE, and I know Meredith will get into this more on the expense side, but the CTE, or UTC as we know it, got pulled out. It used to be that it was in our expense calculation, and then it was in our revenue calculation. The state gave it to us. Now they're giving it directly to UTC. So that's a drop in the state calculation. So in other words, that calculation would have been bigger, and then we would have had a bigger tax and a bigger revenue number. Sorry, bigger revenue and a bigger cost number if we'd kept the UTC in. So that got pulled out. The regionalization is also, the hit to central admin is definitely showing up. That went down from, I think, 142 a student to, I forget what it was, 92. We are at the moment getting the regionalization credit, but that's all up in the air. As I sent you all in an email, there was a bill running through the legislature to undo that particular piece of the budget last year. Rumor on the street I heard is the governor's going to veto that. So the regionalization credit and the central admin numbers are probably still up in the air. But net, the EPS says we have 330,000 more, but a little bit different from most years. Most of that's actually coming just out of taxpayer. It's an increase. It's an increase in taxes. Net from the state is 115,000. Which when you put that against the sped costs and the increased enrollment costs and cost of living increases, it's not covering our increased costs by any stretch of the imagination. Now, as to whether that 200,000, 220,000 is actually going to hit the taxpayer is a whole other question, because you could argue it's just a transfer from our additional local, right, the taxes we charged over and above the state mandated to state mandated. One of the things I know, talking to Ryan, that they've done is they used to only fund 97% of EPS, and now they're funding 100% of EPS. So if we were only spending EPS levels, the state would have just mandated we went up and that the town picked up some of that. But since we're spending nowhere close to EPS levels, what few districts do in this area, I think that 220,000 is really just a transfer from required local to additional non-required local. So the bottom line, I think, is 100,000, 110, 115,000 extra from the state. I think that's the net change to our revenue picture. Anything you would add to that? Yeah.
Are the mics working tonight? It just didn't seem
I think it's on.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you all for inviting me again. I'm always willing to show up if I can. Sorry I was a little bit late. I had to go check in on my daughter on my way home from Augusta before I came here. So it is true that we're seeing about 110,000 more in from the state contribution. There's also a piece that I don't know if you exactly hit on it. We used to have the CTE, funded in there, and that's kind of taken out. So that's almost a $45,000 difference that we no longer get, but we also no longer have to spend from this budget. But I do want to just correct a couple things. EPS is just basic, essential programs and services. Every year, Orono goes beyond that. And I think your characterization of the fact that we usually go beyond that, and now we're going to be required to go beyond what we usually do, is the case. I realize that last sentence was a little complicated there, but it is basically the state requires a certain mill rate across all school districts to require a basic minimum locally raised amount, and that number went up. The actual amount went up even more because Orono has both raised valuation and we've raised our pupil count. Those are both good things in terms of where the state is. In Penobscot County, in comparison to our peers, towns with similar sizes and similar age ranges, we're doing much better at increasing students rather than decreasing students. And I want to thank everyone in this room who's worked really hard to do that, because there's a lot of schools right now that are looking at massive property tax increases because of this. Another big piece of it, and you hit on it as well, the 97% versus 100% of EPS is a big change. When the state doesn't want to fund something, they mess with the numbers. We've seen this year after year after year, mostly in the form of not funding 55% of education. I've been at this podium talking to you folks before about 55% of education, and I think everyone here knows where I stand on what the state should be doing on that front and where the funding should be coming from. But the idea is that that is a big jump in itself. We're raising the amount of money that we consider the essential programs and services up from 97% to 100%. And that's a big difference in terms of what the state is recognizing as their share as well. I'm trying to stay away from editorial comments. There were a lot of changes. There was a huge budget negotiation. There was a state shutdown after that huge negotiation. And we ended up with a product that I ended up voting for, but I don't feel comfortable fully endorsing as the best thing we could have done last year. But what it ends up being for us right now is, a substantial increase in state contribution. There are a number of schools across the state that haven't been meeting their minimum contribution, who are in a lot of hot water right now. And there are some towns that made out better, but in general, I would say Orono is doing pretty well in comparison to other districts. So if you have any questions, I'm here. I don't think, I don't think I had any other big pieces to hit on. But yeah, it's that pupil count and the increase in valuations, so that the same mill rate would raise more money, therefore our expected local share is higher. Those are the two biggest drivers in where the numbers went. So,
I'd like to just make a couple of comments about CTE. So one of the nuances that I learned recently about the CTE change is that while the revenue was going directly to centers, and centers would do their own budgets, and local districts wouldn't be assessed, one of the areas that is not included in their EPS formula that costs are shifted to districts is student transportation to the center, which for us, the quote we've gotten is $25,000 for next year. So that's a very substantial cost being passed along to districts because it's not included in the formula for CTE. So that's one issue, and that's approaching probably 35 to 40%, about 30% of our total assessment last year to our CTE center. So it's hitting districts hard, that piece. The other piece is that the whole idea of a hold harmless provision for a couple of years for the centers really puts our center at a disadvantage, because they are, I think, close to the most efficient operation in the entire state. So they are really at a disadvantage with this funding. So I expect that our center will need to assess towns to make up some of the difference that they're not getting funded, whereas other centers are really inefficient with their operation compared to their enrollments and are getting much higher amounts than the formula calls for during this hold harmless period. So I'm not sure we're going to make out as well on this as maybe the sound bites reflect coming out of Augusta. So those are just two areas of concern around that for us.
That's fair. I had not heard about the transportation of CTE students being shifted. That doesn't even appear to show up. Do you have the 279s in front of you? Or? I mean, I see transportation operating 268,000. Is it rolled into that number?
It's an expense that's carried over to us, so we don't have an allocation for it other than just our general transportation allocation that's been the same.
It's not even a subsidizable cost?
No.
Okay.
Well, I mean, 2 years out, is that a subsidizable cost 2 years down the road, Lynn?
It will depend on our transportation costs.
Yes.
Report out as costs, but for this next budget, QTC, which we never paid that mileage in the past.
Okay. I will bring that up with the Appropriations Financial Affairs Committee and see if that's something we can talk about
Thank
in
you.
any change package that comes forward.
I had one other question. One of the, property values in Orono went up, but part of the reason they appear to have gone up so much is because the valuation used to be averaged over, I think, 3 years, and now it's averaged over 1 year or maybe 3 versus, anyway, the window of valuation got shortened. Was that actually part of the legislative bill, or was that an executive decision? Because the net effect is it makes our property look like it jumped up this year just because they changed the window of averaging.
So I asked that question, and I haven't had a response back to it, whether that was rule or law. But our valuation has actually increased the past 3 years. It's about a 1.5% for the town 3 years ago, about 4.5%. 2 years ago, and about 1.5% again last year. Talking to the town manager, those were mostly attributable to the large student housing complexes that were built, about $30 million more in valuation per building.
There's no doubt they've gone up, and as you say, that's a good thing for the town. It's just that when you change the window, you're not, instead of averaging over low, medium, and high, you're now just averaging over high. And so it has an effect of artificially inflating the increase.
Unfortunately, that's been a debate in Augusta. I think the change was made to switch to 3 years, like 4 years ago.
Okay.
And that ended up helping towns that are seeing a jump in valuation. But what that ended up doing is severely injuring towns that are seeing mills close, but close in such a way that they don't get sudden and severe treatment.
Yep.
So what it was really doing was helping the Cape Elizabeths, the Cumberland County towns, and hurting the Bucksports, the Millinockets, the old towns.
Yeah.
And in that policy debate, I think I may have even been, proposing not the best policy for Orono, but I stood on the floor and spoke that we shouldn't be kicking towns that are going through that while they're down. But yeah, that's a policy debate that's been happening. I don't know if it was this last budget deal or if it was a rule that ended up changing it, though.
Okay.
But either way, if it was, our valuation would have increased either way.
No, it would have for sure. And no, I understand there's larger policy issues which may or may not affect Orono favorably, which may still be the right thing to do. I noticed towns with lower incomes typically came out of this process stronger than towns with high incomes. So
not necessarily. There's a number of towns that didn't used to meet the minimum local requirement, and they're towns like I don't want to like Lewiston or Skowhegan. Some of these towns that have historically been unable to meet the local requirement, and they're seeing the same minimum property tax increase from 8.14 to 8.51. I might have those a little bit.
8.19 to 8.51, I think.
There we go.
Yeah.
There's no math teachers here, right? Okay. So in towns like ours, we spend far above the minimum requirement. In talking to some of my colleagues, the fact that we spend 36%, I think, over the minimum required local contribution, because our town values education, and I don't need to tell you folks that. You write the budgets, but we're in a much different position than towns that have been barely keeping up or not even keeping up with the minimum contribution. So,
yep.
I will just say, we put $160 some odd million more into the education budget, and instead of moving the dial very far on the percentage of budget made up by the state contribution, we increased that about 0.5%, trying to get to 55%. What we ended up doing was giving them a chance to actually take another look at what the real costs of education are and try and align them more with reality, increasing it from 97 to 100%, taking another look at special education costs. And there's a number of other pieces associated with it, some of which have been frustrating. I've been trying to talk to the administration on behalf of the RSU about the administrative piece. And I think, I mean, it looks like you've got a line here at the end of the 279 where...
Right, we currently have the regionalization credit.
Of 15,000, I think?
Yes.
Yeah.
15,500. But even just talking to the administration about what exactly that penalty, how that's working out, has been frustrating on my end. And some of that's politics, but some of that's just, like you said, there's a bill before the legislature right now to try and clarify that and move it back in the realm of reality. So. But what I'm sorry, what I was saying about we weren't able to move the needle. One other thing we were able to do is also help put a focus on schools with high numbers of economically disadvantaged students. You know, again, this is a policy area where it may not help Orono as much as it may help other towns. But if I, you know, step away from just representing Orono to being, you know, a member of the House of Representatives, I think it's in the best interest of all of our state to make sure that economically disadvantaged students have education opportunity. Sorry.
So I was just going to make a point that, you know, the 160 million that was given to education, one of the challenges for us in most districts is that, you know, CTE alone took 51 million off the top of that with the direct to CTE center approach. And, you know, really we're paying for the fact that other centers don't operate as efficiently as ours does. Match that with special ed costs that went up, continue to go up exponentially. And then, you know, some targeted funding to disadvantaged, high disadvantaged communities, really impacts that 160 million. So I think for the public at large, those are key factors to understand around what we're seeing and how that's impacted by those major initiatives coming out of Augusta that eat up a lot of that. So.
Bottom line on that is we didn't make out nearly as poorly as some places did, but we didn't make out all that well either. I mean, that's my bottom line take on this, is that really we're getting $100 and something thousand increase from the state. State's pushing another 200 and something mandatory local requirement, and that's it, which doesn't even allow us to keep up with costs, is my take on it.
No, I would just add to what Meredith said, that 160 million is going into a lot of boxes that are not town aid. Charter schools is another area. I mean, you can have different opinions on charter schools, but it's just a fact that less money is going to towns as that goes off to charter schools. So
yeah, I will try and keep my editorial comments short, but you're absolutely right. We didn't see a huge benefit. I think if we hadn't have put that much more into education funding, we would be seeing still a giant increase in our local contribution requirement because our evaluation went up and our pupil count went up. After all the tinkering is, you know, taken into calculation, those are still the two biggest drivers of how the formula works. And just a note on the impoverished students, that was actually a change made before the last budget. So that's actually not a change between the last budget and this budget. That was just, that was included in the FY18. But I share your frustration. I've been advocating for increased education funding for a while now. I've held bills hostage on the floor to try and you know, horseshoe in $14–20 million more to try and hold the minimum mill rate down 2 years ago. This last budget was disappointing in the end of it. I ended up voting for it because I didn't want a state shutdown, and fortunately that happened anyway. So.
Yeah, I mean, net, I think my biggest worry is, you know, things fluctuate from year to year, but there's a perception out in the public, because it was all over the newspapers, 160 million investment in education, but it's not coming. In many ways, it's not coming here to this district in any significant fashion. So it's just an expectation gap that I think we're going to have a hard time
I also
were
want to
coming.
caution you that there was no funding mechanism attached to that. That was all found revenue through surpluses and cuts in other areas. Although we went into the session with a funding mechanism in place, there was an attempt at least raising a little bit from the lodging tax, and there were a couple other ideas on the table. The final budget did not contain a new dedicated funding stream for education. So I don't want to be too dark and stormy, but that was one of the big failures of this legislature that I felt had a lot of potential.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly, well, I mean, you can point to different places where things came from. I don't think anybody in this room is who I would point to, so.
Yeah,
but
my opinions on that have been pretty well publicized.
Yeah, but net, there's this perception of massive investment in education, and doesn't look like it's sitting here in this seat. But, so I want to end on a positive note and just, I know you've been a fierce advocate for education and education funding and improving education in the state, and I appreciate your time and effort on that.
Sure, and the final note I'll leave you on is the total cost of education has gone up, and from the state's perspective. And although that's not good in terms of, we know there are cost drivers that are running out of control, special education. I mean, there are pieces where we need to make sure that the state is stepping in and keeping towns whole. The fact that the state is actually recognizing now the true cost of the essential programs and services model is a big jump, and will help every town into the future to actually get full funding instead of 97% of what the state deems is essential. So, but I'm open to any questions. OrenO'Ryan@gmail.com, 866-4333. You can find me on line. If there's any questions that come up in the future, I'll try and get an answer to the transportation of CTE students and the effect of the hold harmless on districts that have been running efficiently. And if there are any other specific questions that you want me to track down, I will get back to you as soon as I can.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for taking time. So, I mean, this is mostly intended to be expense side discussion, but we had a piece of the revenue side. I mean, we still don't have tuition, which is the other big variable that's going to affect. And as you heard, it's going to be, well, I guess it's not really going to change the mail-in day, which is a month or two down the road, which is when we start to get a handle on tuition. So, but you now have, assuming everything else is constant, like tuition is constant, the main thing you have is we have $100,000 more than last year. Now we turn to the expense side of things, which the principals have been, and Meredith and the admin team have been hard at work on. Meredith and I went back, and Lynn went back and forth a lot about the right level of presentation. I mean, it's way too early to be diving into the 600 line items, and I think Lynn and Meredith came up with a nice, easily discussable format to start working from. So we have the 10 cost centers, we have last year and this year's budget, and the major drivers have changes in those budgets. I think at this point we were going to go into a roundtable in the back with the admin team. Keep it a little bit informal in the discussion. Is that okay with everybody? Okay.
Is someone taking me?
Yeah, we haven't gotten there yet.
I appreciate the ride.
large impacts for each of those areas. Just to kind of talk through each cost center. One of the overarching things just to know about the last year to this year comparison is, and you don't see it as much in this version as you might in the next version, but we have the impact of the CBA coming into the actual lines where they affect the different line items this year, whereas last year all of those were just projected in contingency because we didn't have the specifics at the time of budgeting to be able to do that. So, you know, the effect of it at the cost center level is that we see the actual changes now as opposed to just the projections. And what we've seen in some areas is that the contingencies, it's really too early to tell, but in some of our cost centers, the contingencies are being stretched and to the limit, and in others, they seem to be ample. So I think what you will see in the cost center, or not in the cost center, the line item changes for salaries, for example, in some lines, will be a little hard to figure out, but that's why, because you have that double impact in the line. So in regular instruction, one of the things that we are trying to, in each area you'll see the salary and benefit increases based on the CBA. We don't really have a number based on, because that's a lot of things together from a lot of lines. But you can kind of put two and two together when you look at all the other major impacts and kind of compare it to the overall, because it is the other major factor in each of those cost centers other than the itemized other areas that we've listed here. So we're requesting an additional teacher at OMS to accommodate the increased enrollment there. Actually, you know, that need moved up to the middle school this year, and it's been a real strain this year. And looking at the needs there, we do think it's time to put that back. It's been gone for, I think, 5 years. When there was a enrollment dip, then there were hard times financially, and so that was a place that was efficiencies were found there. And you know, I think the discussion about this is very right for where we are enrollment-wise at OMS. The ELL teacher, you heard that request last meeting. We're not anticipating a change from what we had to adjust to, so we're carrying that increase forward into next year's budget. And so what we looked at last week was just the net for the rest of this school year, but this is the full year impact of that increase. Additionally, the half 0.5 FTE at OHS for STEM, Reg has a good plan in mind that can really move forward the STEM program and expansion with adding half of a FTE. And so you see the cost for that there. And any of these that you want more details on after I just kind of summarize them, maybe we'll talk about it at the cost center level, or you can tell me if you'd like another format for this. The K2 and grade 3 technology expansion, I should just say K3. You see an amount there that's a third grade one-to-one project, and then at K2 having shared carts at a ratio of really one cart across 2 classrooms of iPads, and that would be the first of 3 years payment. So that's a 3-year commitment of $28,000. That's an approximation right now. We have an increase in the laptop payment that we have recurring from Melty of $79.88, just the way that, I guess, was built into the accrued monthly or yearly payments, an increase there. And then we do have some good news to report. We have some small increases that we were able to report that were larger in that the international stipend, we're decreasing it by 3,000, and will be a recommendation on how we want to structure that coming in the near future. And then the sub-salary line for the high school we're decreasing, and that was because we built in additional there to compensate for, the sabbatical that we have this year. Do you have any questions about that section? And admin, if you want to add in any details you think are pertinent as well.
One question I have is that I know last year we had the K math instructional coach. So that's was funded, just not filled, correct?
Right. So since that's not an addition,
so
it's
it's
not
still
a change.
here. It's just not a change.
Right. Good question.
It was added to last year's budget, so it's not an addition from last year to this year. Right.
So I wanted to make sure I understood our contingency. I think last year we had was it $400,000 contingency?
I can't hear.
So I'm trying to understand the contingency. So was it?
Okay, that's fine. Sorry, I just didn't know if I was missing something.
400,000 that we had last year,
That's high.
or 300,000?
It was
Right.
240.
Yeah.
And it was an additional 140 for for regular ed only
So the contingency was 240
last year.
So we moved it back to normal.
So it went back to 100.
Yes.
Okay. So
And
So
I didn't really
some
show
of the
it up
salary
there.
increases are basically shown by for 140K drops, covering those salary increases.
Right, that's why I didn't,
Sets of top line numbers.
right, that's why I didn't add it there, because
Okay.
it wasn't really a decrease in that section, it was just moved from one spot up to where it really belonged.
Yeah,
So,
so-
but it's all within the same cost center.
Okay. That's what I was thinking. Yep. So how does the board, do we want to talk through one cost center at a time in detail, or would we like to walk through the whole thing and then start talking about it?
I'd rather focus one.
Okay. So Meredith and I talked about what we wanted to get out of this. As you know, budgets evolve in the next 2 or 3 months. This is the first iteration, not the last. If we're going to cut things, I would rather undercut and we can cut again. Would rather not be in a place where we cut everything and then mistakenly look more money and put things back in. So looking at this incremental kind of baby steps, this is the first step or iteration towards the full budget. And I think what we're headed towards is some guidance on specific items. If there's a strong board consensus on a specific item, we definitely should do that, or we can't afford to do that. Everything in here is not something we would like to do, but we can't afford to do that, or we definitely should do that. And we also may want to talk about some big picture guidance of, I don't think we're in a place where we're going to be saying add 100,000, but in a place of if we need to cut 100,000, we need to cut 200,000, giving that guidance back for the admin team to work through. So we can talk about either specific items, or when we get to that, we should probably talk about the big picture as well. So, go ahead. On the regular instruction, the specific items.
I want to hear about the STEM teacher plan.
Well, so one of our science teachers was going to halftime next year, and so we'll need to replace that with a halftime, just to make up for those missing classes. And so we can make that search for a full-time teacher, and that additional capacity will be for our STEM offerings. So to me, it's like great.
Classes.
Yeah, and so this teacher wouldn't necessarily teach like, so new classes around STEM are engineering design, the, robotics, intro to robotics, intro to Python, and so this teacher would teach the robotics, the Python, and pick up the classes from Leslie Boyd, and then any other kind of wherever needed.
We're also looking at using a portion of that half
the university liaison.
So
maybe
to,
coordinator.
also to provide for, the someone in the building who could serve as a university liaison, someone who's really gonna facilitate and develop those lasting relationships with the university, not just in STEM, but kind of across all content areas. And then also just kind of be, I hesitate to use the term STEM coordinator, but a real STEM leader around any kind of initiatives, both in the building and really, I kind of see it in the district.
And you said it's gonna be more like a team approach. than just
Yeah,
having
so
individual
we really have a group of teachers that are from the library, with Jackson Sanborn, and technology with Christy Boyd, and in science with Jeff Owen and Zach Arnold, who are really proposing a lot of these classes. And so it's, to me, it's growing and evolving from, we're looking for a STEM person, and that's the person who does the STEM, to we have a team of teachers who are like into it, and so I love that that's where we are right now. So we've got a group of people who are really behind increasing and improving our offerings, really promoting STEM, and so this position would be to add to that.
I would just add also that one of the kind of features that goes along with this is to continue to have the ed tech we have in the library that we added last year to help with our STEM programming. And keeping that there allows what Reg has just said around having all of these different individuals involved with the programming, because there's a lot that happens in the library around STEM because we have that extra support in there. So that's a really important piece to continue with the model that Reg is setting up, as opposed to removing that support and just adding a one STEM teacher. I really like the approach that Reg is taking to have more of a team that's working together to move forward the STEM programming.
Yeah, because the library, and you guys can speak to it, I feel like as students, but I feel like the library has really become this technology hub to a certain degree. Everything from the virtual reality that was brought in to the 3D printing lab, this technology take-apart table. There's just a lot that's going on in there that really was the goal, and the vision was to make that library space kind of a 21st century learning space, and really do some work around the facilities aspect of it, but it really is a group of people who are in there, and that's where a lot of technology is happening, so.
And middle school is also benefiting from that.
Yeah, and it's everything
So
from
it's a lot of
coding
bang
to
for that.
robotics to 3D printing, just dumbing around with technology, taking stuff apart, and it's been pretty cool. Sean's a part of that, so just a little.
Yeah, I mean, speaking as a parent of a middle high school, right, I'm not doing that much, but it is exploding at the middle school too.
Yeah.
Just the 3D printing, and it's exciting to see. It's really bringing a lot of students' attention.
Yeah, and so I feel like just this halftime position, which I feel like it's just real bang for the buck around what we can do with that.
We've been talking about the position for 4 years, so I'm not gonna hear me speak against it. I definitely would advocate that Jeff's time that's freed up, we think about focus on high school, sure, but whole district.
Yeah.
I definitely think that adds value to that.
Totally.
I'm working on vertical curriculum.
Yep.
So also would benefit from connections to the university, so.
Any other questions in this summer?
One other thing I'd add, I know the K-8 math instructor is in there. I forget if you and I talked about it when we last talked about it, but there's always been this kind of thought on the paper of maybe that's 0.2 FTE, assistant curriculum coordinator. So that's just something to think through too. I know there's a lot of places to spend on curriculum. We've got a lot of places to spend outside of curriculum, so I don't have a strong opinion about that, but that's definitely something it's no cost to the budget, but that's something to think about.
I really see that as a need for us to help keep things moving hard to maintain momentum when the principals and I are the ones trying to keep the momentum going, really, without someone else that's really their focus. So I had kind of envisioned that this person wear kind of some district responsibility hats around curriculum, but the primary focus of the job would be on K-grade coaching. But that is really, I think, something that would help us with our momentum, because I feel that it's very, it doesn't take priority over other issues that we have going sometimes, and I think that's something that will help us.
I mean, looking at this, it's hard to just cut. I think this board is gonna have a hard conversation about technology. As, I'm the K3, as future jobs are in computers, so not to mention just the basics of learning are in computers these days. But the state's stepping back from NLTI, so we're gonna be picking up a bigger and bigger piece of the 12 LTI just to keep that maintained. So
the price, because the way that contract is written, it went up $25 per enrollment for years 2 through 4, plus your increased enrollment is why you're going to see that bill. But I think that bill will settle kind of in where it is for years 2 through 4, and then the buyout, which is another year discussion, is going to be a big one too.
Right.
Especially with that increase, because it used to be about $48 to a device, and now it's about $170 to buy out the device after year 4 is a huge conversation.
yeah, and
Pondering.
there's a bigger political context to it. I think the state is not necessarily politically committed.
Yeah,
anymore.
You can get on that soapbox.
Yeah, that's PTSD for me, but let's leave that for another day.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they're all unfortunate, but I think this district's gonna have our conversations about how much we're willing to locally fund for classroom technology.
So on that vein, the third grade, using the Chromebooks, and having a one-to-one Chromebook program, I think is a good model for us to use in a grade level and see how it works with the applications our students are using at least at that level, and to consider as we move into having to replace other devices down the road where the future is uncertain about the state support, are there other options that we should look at? So, he's using the model tonight for Michelle's broadcast with us, and it's a nice little device, and I think it is something that I'm eager to see how it works in the classroom. It needs to shift. Everyone's used to the Mac platform and the look of it, but I think the students are a lot more flexible with that than we are as adults sometimes. I know that's true of me.
And we use a lot of the G Suite tools anyway, and Google, like, it's actually part of this Chromebook experiment we're doing it this year too, with this one pilot, and then Leah, the down special ed, is doing a pilot one too, is that Android and Google are coming together to do the offset app so that you can, like I've shown, like Microsoft Office is on there right now. Just launch that and use Microsoft Office and explain everything, and Python is now on there, so and like I said,
can you run things like Scratch for elementary school computer programming on the Chromebooks?
Yeah, so Scratch actually has gone by base. They have Scratch went by base in about 2015 because they shifted from the application piece to using JavaScript as the main platform. And so you can just go right on the web and and that thing survives an 8-foot drop, but I've been told they can't demonstrate that, so.
Okay, thanks.
Before you can wake us up.
Yeah.
This is a whole other conversation for another night, but I'm curious about, as we get more and more involved with Google for privacy, for respect for students, because we all know it's very high for adults. Anybody have thoughts on that OMS teacher? This was the last position cut in this district, and we have had this bubble that made it through, bubble of low enrollment that made it through. It's now reversed, but thoughts on that?
I'm just curious if there's a specialty
at the next meeting as to what they have mapped out in terms of where this person fits in their schedule configuration for next year. So.
Thanks.
I know he's not here, but maybe, is this at all realistic to conceive of this as a halftime position? Are we gonna be able to hire somebody in a halftime position, or is this really all or none position?
I don't know that I could say, you know, emphatically it's all or nothing. We haven't discussed anything less than a full-time in terms of this request. But certainly we could look at that to see how that addresses the needs that they're seeing. So.
This year's sixth grade is huge in comparison to the grades that came before, but it's also huge in comparison to the ones that are coming after. Fifth grade is significantly smaller than sixth grade, and fourth grade is even smaller still. So we need to take that into consideration.
Fifth grade is about like the eighth grade that's leaving.
Right. This year's
And
fourth
then
grade is
fourth grade
quite
is the
small.
small group.
And that fourth grade group would match the small seventh grade group. So it would be consistent, so the fifth grade coming up would replace the same size eighth grade, and then the fourth grade would replace a smaller eighth grade again, so we're still gonna see the consistent total number. Right. So the numbers aren't going up or really down, it's consistently this group, yeah.
Basically, this
It
year.
went up this year, big amount.
I don't wanna jump cost centers, and certainly I respect Jake's perspective to go through it one cost center at a time. I think we should do that, but if you look all the way at the end, an increase of 5% is a pretty large increase, and you start looking at some of these things, and you have to divide them into what's an option for us and what's not optional. Some of these things are just not optional. We don't have a choice. We have to, it's an increase we have to cover. So if you take those off the table, and you think that 5% is too big, which again is a discussion we need to have, but if you want to have that discussion, then you do, you take the ones that are not optional off the table, you're dealing with things that are options. And as much as we may want some of these things that are options, I don't think we're going to be able to have them all. Recognizing that these numbers could change, and if past is prologue, they will change because they change every year. But trying to predict where they're going to change is foolish at this point.
In years past, it used to be pretty reliable. We got a bump in the March adjustment because special ed was, their formula didn't fully take us into account. It'd be nice if that happens this year.
It'd be great. Hopefully it does.
So to speak to Mark's point, maybe I think we've seen it in the past, a sheet which tells us contractual obligations, we can't get out of these ones, and then everything else.
And I think that's kind of coming. It's really hard right now to kind of say, because looking at this bottom line doesn't really tell us anything. We have to have our full revenue to really talk about what the point is going to hit the locals. Because this bottom line number really doesn't give us any information. Because we need the full picture. This is just kind of like our first, here are the things that came up as administrators of needs, wants that are changing the budget. But you're right, it's really hard to kind of make those decisions until we're at least at the next phase where we have a better revenue picture, which will continue to change as we get better high school numbers and different numbers, but we're not even at the first point yet. We're usually looking at that number up in the middle of our cost center thing that talks about the tax rate increase. And that takes into factor all of our revenue changes and our expenditure changes and how that's gonna hit the community. So, maybe 5% doesn't look so bad when you're looking at revenue, but maybe it looks way too high. It's really hard to tell right now.
Yeah, we can circle back to the big discussion, but, just for what it's worth, if you assume salary and benefit is everything not listed, which one is simplification, it's $122,813. This is probably the area that affects students the most. Did you have any thoughts on to anymore or anything.
What really stood out to me is this teacher. A lot of momentum.
I think in particular with the way that Reg has drawn that up, I would tend to be.
Yeah, it's working really well.
Yeah, I have to agree, especially like classes like Intro to Python and all those classes, you know, I totally have access to and stuff like that that I would have definitely enjoyed. So, for like future generations, I think that's and along and that kind of goes along with the same lines of the iPads and Chromebooks. I think that would be helpful, but
Great. Any other last comments you want to make before you guys head out? I'll be here for a while. I assume you fit with the IP increase.
What is that? What is that?
It's an increase now that you're leaving.
The ice is getting a little thicker.
Bigger trophies.
The Titans not increasing.
I also think that increase the golf. There seems to be a lot of support and enthusiasm for that this year. I think a positive response.
Great. Thanks. Something else before we move on to number 2? Sven?
So in the vein of, I think, contractual obligation versus options, not as many options, a lot of obligations that really are.
Did you walk? Do you want me to ride? I'm going that way.
But, you know, the summary you see here, Sharon, to maybe add some detail as you have questions, but ed tech positions, we've taken a couple of requests to you this year to make additions, or I think one request this year to make an addition. The net change from this year to next year, not, if you take out the one that we brought to you, is 4 ed techs. And that's really a function of a variety of things. 2 are, you know, individual student needs. And one is, the one we brought you this year was the enrollment at OMS that was just huge numbers for the staff we had. And then the other 2 reflect one additional need at ASIN and another just to get other, work. And so that's probably the biggest thing in the special ed budget is impacting the numbers for next year. You can see also that the special services office is requesting an increase in the admin assistant hours by 6.5 hours a week. Sharon's office, with our office, we cut some hours in last year's budget to try to help the budget, and she's seen a real impact this year and the ability for the staff to meet the required deadlines, and feels like we need to make a change there so that we can involve the operations that are the position that does all the schedule and parent notification for the services, Sharon reflected that as in last year's budget, what was in there was not really accurate, it didn't reflect the needs that we had. So it was really a
There's also two positions that were not in the budget that were added last minute because of tuition students, and those two have revenues attached, but it's showing up in the expense side, and I don't have revenue figured out for you yet. Last year, revenue for 16-17 was, double check with Lynn, I tried, but it was, well, my numbers say 423,448. So that would have been, again, special ed tuition and recapture costs for one-on-one tuition students. So that's M plus the salary adjustments that everyone's getting.
So it's 5 positions in
It's
next
5
year's budget,
actual positions.
2 of which we're already doing this year, is that right?
All but one.
4 of which we're doing this year. Anybody else have questions on that?
And that amount of 139 is for the 5 positions, not, so I know you were saying the 2 are only tuition.
Yes, so we have to put all the expenditures in the expenditures, and
Right.
then we have a line up on the revenue that shows sped revenue.
That's what it is.
So 2 positions are offset then?
So 2 are offset. What I'm trying to offset with the tuition, as I said, that is a bit of a risk. And so the net gain would be the one that you approved for the middle school for the 6th grade, and if you approve for the high school, those are really fresh costs. That's a business term, I'm sure.
Fresh uncovered costs, right?
Right.
Yeah.
The increased hours for our scheduler, if you remember, we went from 24 hours to 20 last year. But then she picked up some additional hours in another school, which meant I had to lose hours for lunchtime. So I actually lost 6.5 hours this year. And at the same time, when we added 20 more students with IEPs, from 122 to 142 on our October 1st count. And so we're really struggling to meet the timelines on scheduling IEP, ELL meetings, 504 meetings, GC meetings. We gather, because when we take in tuition students, I also sell our office services, so we schedule IEP meetings and do all the mailings and printings and production that goes along with managing the paperwork. And we charge a daily rate back to our sending districts for that. So there is a bit of a cost recovery in that. So right now we're running total with resident and tuition. I have 181 students versus 146 of those residents. So there is some recovery of those costs for tuition students, but not for superintendent agreement students and certain complements. The last 3 bullets for the press contract for our site services for the high school summer program and software fees are just active costs that we haven't, didn't reflect well in last year's budget.
There's a lot of wiggle room in this cost.
Hmm?
It doesn't look like there's a lot of wiggle room in this cost.
There's the 2 positions. That's the wiggle room.
Yeah, correct.
2 positions and the increased hours.
Right. Everything else is.
Move on. So we talked about CT a little bit when Ryan was at the podium. What you see that, what we built into the budget is, assuming that we're going to be assessed an additional amount by UTC. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I think it could happen. So at this point in the budget, as Brian said, we don't want to, have surprises later. So this is one thing that is yet to be determined. I think there's a lot of, there's good reason to want to help the program that's shown they're running very efficiently in comparison to all the others. But then there's also the other side of the coin that we're left also holding the bag with for transportation that's not even reflected in this line. So, if we were assessed 21,000 plus the transportation costs, that's 46,000 that we would be spending on CTE that, we're only going to get a fraction of that back 2 years down the road. So that's something I think we'll have to talk about as a board as we find out what their request would be, and Erin would be our really representative on the executive board of UTC to vote on that request, whatever it ends up being. So that's why I put 21,000 in there, because the preliminary budget I saw from them reflected that it would assess us that much more.
So they're already moving that.
They were moving in that direction with a preliminary budget before the revenues came out. When he shared that with us, the revenues were projections, and so he wasn't sure, there were a lot of unanswered questions that have since been clarified, and, the state has put out a paper saying that the formula that they're using should cover all costs except for major capital needs and transportation. But the reality is, and I'll pass this around if you're interested, you might need your magnifying glass if you're like me, but some regional centers are getting $800,000 above what the formula says they should be getting. That's the highest. More typical, it's around 300,000 more than the formula calls for. Our center is getting $500,000 less than the formula calls for because they've been such an efficient program. There's a real inequity with this. So that's CTE. But that transportation cost I mentioned earlier is built over in the transportation line on cost center transportation.
So that would be, $46,000, we're basically saving $20,000 and getting no revenue. So
Right,
this
it's
one.
45,000 saving, but also 45,000.
No, it's, yeah, it's
a number, but they're not giving it to us.
the 45, but then if you take out the transportation that we've added of the 25, it's only 20,000 that we're saving, but we're not getting any of the revenue that we were getting to pay 66,000. So.
Impressed. I didn't seem to believe in the utilization.
So next cost center, co-curricular, not a lot of change here. I believe that transportation cost change is actually just a recoding from another cost center.
Yep.
That it was inaccurately put up in instruction, but it's actually a co-curricular. The trip to Montreal is a co-curricular trip, not a class trip. So it's sponsored by the French and Spanish clubs. So that's why that got added here. The golf, as Becca pointed out, is thriving at the high school, and so we're recommending that transition into a, I don't have the right words for it, but a fully supported varsity coaching position. The past year or so, it's been a smaller stipend amount that was just kind of a fixed stipend. So this is going into the standard funding formula, and that amount came out of the stipend committee supporting that level of funding. It's really the lowest amount of funding for a varsity sport when you look across all the stipends. But Mike talked to us and felt that was commensurate with the responsibility and the time for that particular coaching position. And then the ice hockey, it is actually increasing the stipend. We share that with Old Town, so they really, their terms dictate our coaching costs, and so they've informed us year to the hockey stipends for the two coaches. I think there are two coaches in this amount. So that's what that is. So, other than that, there were just some small changes across a variety of areas that didn't amount to a significant enough amount to report.
Meredith, how is it they dictate without any kind of consultation on it?
Well, I think they did talk with Mike to say, look, this is what we're considering, this is why, and I think, there is a healthy partnership with that. But I guess what I'm trying to say is it doesn't come out of our stipend structure of how we determine stipends and have it in our contract, that it really falls under their contractual structure, the way we run hockey, because they're really the fiscal agent for our hockey team, and they just bill us. So I maybe mischaracterized by the way I said that. I'm not saying that we have no say in the Old Town Orono hockey program. It's just that the stipend is not within our stipend framework. It's within theirs. So.
Basically, it's their CBA. And
yes.
They hire and we contract, so.
Right. And then the fiscal agent, they also, the same goes with all the expenditures. They pay for them all, and then they bill us half. And we really watch that and communicate with them very well, and right down to transportation, making sure that they don't bill us for transportation, then it comes off our miles from Searbus, because we already pay for our busing. So it is, very collaborative, and we do watch closely what we're being billed. So.
The whole ice hockey partnership's been a fantastic success. So.
Yeah. And that 3,000 is exactly, it used to be up under the first cost center, but just in more of learning more about the trip, the kids have got to be in French club or Spanish club, and so it's that kind of trip. So it was basically just recording it in the correct cost center. It's not an additional cost, it's there.
Can I ask one more question on this center? So the three bullets add up to approximately $6,400. Is the rest of that 32,000, is that increases in stipends, or what is that?
No, it's spread out across a lot of places. Well, do you want to, what were we going to say, Lynn?
Yeah, it's a combination of, so in the contract too, each of the stipend points increase every year. So it's just the actual increase on each of the stipends, and then just minimal amounts in a line here or there. I mean, you're probably talking a couple $100 here or there. Something that when we pointed out, obviously hockey wasn't very, kind of the big number that we've been pulling out, but because it was a position, we figured we would put it in there. But the others aren't changes in positions, just point level increases as far as the contract each year. Each point is worth a higher dollar value.
I mean, there were probably some other things we could have put in this line as I look at this. Things like in both the middle and high school supplies for extracurricular, there's probably a total of $6,300 increase that is for different uniforms, equipment needs across those programs. So it's not it's spread out differently than in other cost centers where we can identify some pretty significant impacts. Dues and fees for skiing went up $1,500. The regular state championship dues and fees. So just a variety of things like that, that our filter that we were using didn't work well in this section for the thresholds we were looking for to be big cost impacts.
And they weren't really unusual costs. It was just maybe a change, like increased fees. We paid those fees before, they've increased.
So Ben, I know, like, when I almost first joined the board, we had said we were gonna look at, like, all the stipends and extracurricular things and kind of, like, review it all. But I don't know when that forum ever comes up. How is that handled?
So right now, I think we're working towards conversations last month, both Sean and Meredith about this is getting a formal list, probably that Sue Bell keeps, of the approved stipends. And so with the board's role would be, anytime there's a change, which the COLF would be an example of a change, we approve, the stipend committee lays it out with the cost, but the board approves whether to approve that change or not. If we're looking at major changes to stipends, that would be with the next CBA session. And I know Shaw's being proactive and they've been doing some research, and we probably all want to do some research about how our stipends compare to other districts. Starts to get very tricky to get apples to apples comparisons, but I do think, that number that we've seen, $100,000 increase in stipends, certainly that rate's not sustainable. But probably the bigger discussion waits for the next CBA, because we locked in most of our stipend structure in the CBA.
Yeah. But, I mean, like, just for what we pay stipends for, like, is that ever, like, if we add things, do we ever take things away of things that have lost interest and?
No, we haven't done that.
Oh,
We have unfilled positions.
Yeah.
We have unfilled positions and not this collective bargaining agreement, but the one before it, so the one before it. We actually stripped a lot of stipend positions out of that either were not filled or hadn't been used in a long time, or we were going for cost savings. And some of those have come back, like the ACE of volunteer coordinator and the ACE of Greenhouse, but a lot of them still disappeared.
I mean, to your point, I think getting this list, just a list of every position, we're paying some dollar amount attached to it. And just being able to see that list would be helpful in assessing when and how we make those changes. No question, but I agree that getting that list would be a good start towards, I mean, a year and a half old version of this exists in the back of the CBA appendix, but getting a current version of that list is something that we can see too.
But anytime there's added, it will come to the board before being added.
So this is the only one that I remember being added. I didn't hear. It's always a little bit, I feel like I have to ask every time what this is.
Right, without that list, it's kind of, I guess, can't stand for trusting into the board. I mean, the other ones that have been added that we don't really talk about as additions is like a mentor, every time we hire a new teacher. Mentor.
But yeah, that's in a different spot in the budget.
Yeah.
And the international program assistant was added
We talked about
last
that
year.
one.
Yes.
Year before that, the big additions were Inshore Choir and the high school musical. Those were pretty much volunteer. But I completely agree, transparency is going to help, so I can.
Yeah. There were a lot of additions previously. This
Right.
one doesn't have a lot of changes from the last budget to this budget.
Having a list and being able to approve the list.
That's something we're going to work on in our office. And Shauna's given us a good head start to share the document that they worked with in the CBA. Just be our starting point. So, ready to move on to this student staff support cost center. So in this cost center, the first item there, contracted social work, that's an item that we've added that will be, if our regionalization collaborative comes to fruition, that is part of where we see a real need that we want to plug into that collaborative to access some more social work services. It's something we see as a need across our district, and the only services we have really are with where Sharon has targeted funds in special ed. So unless a student is special ed, we really don't have adequate funding to be able to provide social work services to students, and we have needs there. So being able to access some hours, just to buy some hours out of that collaborative, is a really cost-effective way to begin to add some of those services. And so it's the one place where we've added something that will, because we have to participate in the regional collaborative, we have to join in for something. So this would be one of the areas where we would join in if it goes forward. E-rate project, and I think we're gonna talk about that in action items tonight. I know Sean's talked with you previously about that. Think that, you understand the concept of, we spend $55,000 to get, a net of $110,000 worth of work roughly in our school. And it's the project to upgrade our network infrastructure. And so it's a one-time cost. It's not something that's recurring in a that kind of scale. There are some small recurring costs, just of network costs, but we currently have network recurring costs in our budget. So this is the big chunk of this is a one-time kind of expenditure in the budget, which I know offers you some options as to how we can think about that. But it's a significant one in our budget for this year. The student information system, we just have some increased costs being passed along to us in multiple areas with web schools going up. We have Mastery Connect in there. And then I think it's Paradigm also in this one that we've been having available to us at a significant savings this year. And so next year to renew, we need to have an increase in that area. And then we reduced some costs that have been held in the budget for PBE work, that we've had a lot more money in that line than we've been actually spending on that. There's still money in there, but I think we can comfortably reduce by $12,000 in that line and still have plenty of room to support. Really, it's teacher release time, and that's a tricky thing because, paying teachers for extra hours and things like that, because there's kind of a wall as to how much really we can ask teachers to do in that realm. So I think what we have in there is substantial for what our needs are, and more than we've accessed ever.
I'm trying to remember the history of that. I think we put 20,000 in there a couple of years ago. It was the big push year. Instead of saying go hire these consultants, kind of said these and that we think best, but am I remembering that?
That was my, I had been hired, but I hadn't started yet, and that's what I remember during kind of this budget talk was, it was going to be earmarked to Great Schools Partnership or something like that, but instead, I think it was reduced maybe to 20, but let's just leave it there.
We had been spending money to Great Schools Partnership.
Yeah.
We made a decision to no longer do that.
Yeah.
And to leave the money there.
Earmarked it.
Yes.
And we're using it in some other lines, like the Mastery Connect line, and I don't know that we're using it with stipends for teachers or per diem rate for extra work needed. I don't think there's a lot of that happening. So I think it's time
we were
to.
using that a lot more in the beginning, but we're not using it as much now.
So there's still some money in there. There's some opportunities for the high school to kind of think through, what are the needs and how can this help us meet that need?
And there's a little bit for each school too. I mean, there's some for middle school and Asa Adams as well.
So any questions in that area? There's, in this line, and it's not listed here, but salary and benefit increases do impact this line as well, because, there's salaries throughout this cost center.
And there would have been any contingency in that cost center last year.
I don't know what that tells me. We're underestimating the increases in salary and regular ed. Right? Because the contingency was all on the regular ed, but the salaries were spread out all over the place.
Right.
Well, special ed had some salary contingency, but this line did not.
Right. It was just special ed and regular ed. We took a portion and moved it to special ed because there's no contingency lines in the other sections.
So the actual double hit to these lines is, an actual hit to the cost center this year.
And if we already talked about this, but Rich, do you see that 12,000 continuing at that level for the next several years or ramping down over the next several years?
struggling students earn proficiency-based diploma. I think there's still so many questions around. I think there's questions around whether this year's ninth graders are really going to be the class that earn. So I think there's just a lot up in the air. We want to keep some in there. It's hard to tell where it's going at this point.
So basically, we went from 20,000 total in the budget to 8,000 in the budget. So that's.
I think that's pretty safe.
Yes, I mean, not to say it's wrong, but my understanding as a board member a couple of years ago is that it was more of a one-time cost, but I totally take your point that the state hasn't even got the dice there on the table yet, so.
Yeah, we're still waiting for guidance around and the rules of awarding diplomas, and so.
Yeah.
There. So for the next system administration, really the only change in that is an insurance change and employee change of what they're taking. Same thing that at the school administration line. Those can, in smaller cost centers, those swings can be a big impactor just for that area, and so those are really the only drivers in those sections. Sorry.
I guess this action technically, if I recall correctly, goes back in cost center 5, but is there any benefit to us if we did use the K-8 math instructor, recognizing some of that on a curriculum line instead of a grad line?
Yeah, I mean, it would move part of the salary over into that section 5.
Yeah, but it probably doesn't actually have any benefit for us in terms of how state reimburses or anything.
I don't think it would be. Just in terms of accurately reflecting the work and the job description.
Yeah.
State that's at.
We've gone back and forth between full-time curriculum in that area. So anyway, yeah, okay, I agree. I don't think there's, not like where it matters.
I mean, I think if that's what we decided, we would do that. But it's not going to, it would just shift money from one cost center to the other.
And I know it always takes quite a while for us to get the final insurance increase number, but what did you bake in to this for an increase?
For medical insurance,
Yeah.
10%.
So you baked in 10. What did we go up last year? I know 2 years ago we ended up at flat or 1, right?
Yeah, I think 2 years ago it was 0. Last year I want to say
3?
no, it was higher than that, I think. Yeah, I think it was 6, 5,
Five
between
or
5 and 6
six.
in that area.
So you got 10.
And then our property insurance, they said that they would, I mean, we don't have that yet, but it would estimate at 12%. That was what we got from MSMA. As those increases kind of across the board are increasing higher this year, so.
And we did get our rates on workers' comp, and that went down a little, actually.
Yeah.
And then, also, didn't she get the rates on unemployment?
Unemployment went down as well, just enough, but, this is your first version, but in our version, we saw a drop down because we've been printing it, but, and of course, those, we did count them. They're not set in stone, but they were pretty sure of where our numbers would be. So we were able to do a decrease there. One other small decrease that you would see throughout is the way we were doing a workers' comp computation. We found out that we could do it a little bit differently, and that we had our food service director and our maintenance director following the same kind of rate that the food service workers and the custodians do, and they don't need to be.
transportation? Everyone good? So in transportation, our contract with SEER, we are recommending that we opt in to the one-year extension. So there's a increase in that. It's fairly small increase in that calculation, but added to that is the UTC miles as well. So the net increase of just the contract change was just about $5,000, but it's the $25,000 UTC transportation that's really keeping that line up right now. So maybe Ryan can make some headway. Also reached out to Dave Walker over in Old Town just to see if we can explore sharing anything in that route. We'd have to look at times and how we could coordinate that, but it seems really crazy to not explore ways we can help each other out with that. Because it's, we're sending a bus sometimes, it's too many, I'm getting ahead of myself for the van, but not by very many for us, but, so we need a bus, but we certainly could have, all of Old Towns on our bus with us. He was interested in talking and seeing what we could figure out. Also, just anticipating a diesel fuel increase. Brent's gotten some preliminary numbers for us, and it's looking like around a $4,000 increase there for diesel fuel in general. And then the last item is recommending that we purchase a minivan as a district van. A lot of districts do this. Some of them have a whole fleet of vans in addition to their bus service. One of the things that we talked about with this is just the many ways that we could use this as a cost savings for the district, where we're currently either getting buses for small groups or renting vans for staff, or our staff sometimes using their own vehicles to transport students, which is a little bit of a lot more liability concern than using a district-owned van. So one of the other requirements that we have that we anticipate being able to use a van for instead of busing is sometimes with our McKinney-Vento students, we could utilize a van to arrange for transportation for a student instead of having to have a bus to bring one or two kids from an area because they've been displaced. We also pay mileage sometimes to families from McKinney-Vento. So if we can't always maybe solve it with a van, but there are a number of areas that we've talked about that really could be beneficial to the district on a number of fronts, fiscally and also with liability. Another program that I talked to about this, and they said yes, it would be a great help to them, is our national program. Said that this would really help them because they do a lot of renting of vans throughout the year to transport the students in that program for evening events, weekend events, such. So that's a request we're bringing to you. I think that there are a lot of good reasons to have a van. There are some additional costs with having a van. We've built those in. We built in some fuel expense under, I think the next line. Okay, it's under the gas line, okay. And just some miscellaneous expenses around registration, and hopefully with a new van, you're not going to have a lot of maintenance needs. Built in, a small amount for some maintenance and oil changes, things like that. So that's the request we have in there.
So this would be an 8-passenger
Yeah, that's
minivan?
my question.
Not one of those like
15
bigger?
passenger.
No, we're not allowed to get the big passenger.
We're not.
Our MSMA or insurance, liability insurance would not allow anything beyond a 7-passenger minivan. I don't think well, I don't.
What's the difference?
Well, I guess they would allow an 8. I don't think.
It's a seat configuration.
Yeah, I think they would allow the 8 configuration. I guess more commonly they're 7.
Yes, but
passengers.
you can get it.
Yeah. So yes, just not anything larger than the minivan.
So I'm assuming that in the, I mean, not that I'm opposed to the van, but if, in the instance of the international students, if we own one van, we'd still have to rent. Because we have more than 8.
Yeah, so right now what Mackenzie says she's doing is she's using her vehicle a lot, but then renting a van when that's not sufficient. And this would allow her to, number one, if she doesn't need a second vehicle, to use this instead of having to track mileage and do mileage reimbursements. And then when they do need an extra van, eliminate the need for an extra van.
It's not always the whole group, right, that she's transporting. It'd be nice if we were allowed to get rid of them.
The other thing is, 8 is really 7, and 7 is really 8 because of the traffic.
We've got to drive.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I think having one van will help us see if we think there's promise for maybe adding additional van down the road, a van or two. Because there are groups that, especially if you get to 2 vans as a district, that you can really eliminate busing for a larger group of activities and needs. We talked about some of the groups going to university to access the facilities there on a routine basis, weekly. That if we had a couple of vans, could accommodate that as opposed to the student busing that we're paying for. So, but, you know, trying to do incremental, really, trial with this recommendations from the community.
So in a situation like that, who would drive the van? Because normally it's a SEER driver, so we have staff doing that.
It would be staff. Yeah, so there's
That are riding the bus.
They would, it had to be.
Normally, but now they're just driving.
Yeah. So in that case, they would have to provide us their driver's license, and we make a copy of that and keep it on file, but we don't have to. Right now, if staff is transporting students, like for example, the math team, routinely the sponsors transport those students to needs. The van could really help a group like that, and the auto insurance requirements that our staff have to, you know, provide to us, we would have to ask for things like that. Just their driver's license.
We would have control over the maintenance.
Right.
I mean, normally if we're to purchase, it's cheaper than leasing, but I guess if you're thinking it's a bad budget year, and then you mentioned this to me, but leasing would be another option to spread that cost out.
Right, so this is a complete purchase, 23,000. They give us a really pretty good deal. I think it is just a 7-passenger. We'd have to go back and get other options for an 8-passenger. I think the cost would be a little higher.
So who have you, I mean, 23,000 is an awful cheap price for.
Yeah, it's
Who's
the Starlings.
I think this one's
Okay.
Because the 23,000, if I heard right, is not just the purchase price, it's purchase and registration.
No, that's built
No.
in a couple of other places, those
Okay.
small amounts.
So
The
the
23 is
23 really
the
is just
van.
the ticket.
Yeah. Any other questions, comments? I mean, this is obviously, I mean, we could do, they would offer probably a 3-year lease option if we asked them to show us that in comparison. And we can get that if you'd just like to see it.
I mean, typically they're making money off the lease, so if you can afford to purchase, should. It's just a question of whether it's the right year to spread it out.
I think if we're down to that question, it'd just be a matter of not getting it. I mean, I'm not opposed to looking at it. If the things are that tight, then we just don't get it.
We lose out a lot in the deal that we're gonna get, if we purchase it outright.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on to facilities, ready for between the two, like the half at ONS, he flexes over and cleans some of the middle school that's kind of in the middle area, so, they really, Brent is, feels really stretched with this. They use a lot of, extra time, sub-time to, compensate for staffing issues that they have in the custodial needs of that building. So that's where the request for the custodian is coming from. And in doing that, though, cutting back some sub-hours that they have built in, that they have to kind of beef up their sub-hours in anticipation of needing more subs than they might otherwise. So there's a reduction there. The request for a maintenance truck for our district, one of the things, I think we're fortunate to have a maintenance director that has a truck, because you know, anything that has to be picked up or things he has to go and do that require a way to bring back in something other than a car, you know, Brent uses his own personal vehicle and tracks mileage, and we reimburse him for that. And I think that, you know, having our own truck would really help us, again, on not just that front, but the front of being able to take care of some of our own needs with salting areas and some additional plowing that we're trying to do. We contract with Black Bear to do certain areas, and they've actually been very generous with us in that contract to really go beyond the scope of the contract to provide services to us. But there's some things that the town has indicated they're having to cut back their level of service just with changes on their end. And another is the salt access with the town's been cut off for us because we are not able to pick it up ourselves in our own vehicle. It would be Black Bear picking it up. So for, you know, having our own vehicle allows us to access that salt supply because the town can be assured it's being used for school purposes again. So there are a number of reasons why having a maintenance truck would be beneficial to us. This amount is higher because it is a truck with a salter, what is it called? Spreader. And a plow.
Is it a full bed spreader or is it a tailgate version? What are we looking to salt or sand?
The parking lots and some sidewalk areas. And, you know, just as an example, what week was it? Yesterday. Yeah, yesterday. My days are at this hour of the night confused. You know, we had some slippery areas when we started school that the town and Black Bear eventually were able to get to, but we're limited with what we can do to help out in those areas because of equipment limitations that we have. And, you know, there are things that we would like to have done to be able to open school and feel confident that the conditions are as favorable as we can make them for that to happen, that, you know, we have to wait to get those things taken care of sometimes. And I think, you know, Brent uses a tractor to do some areas, and that's really the only piece of equipment we have to help out, and he does some other things with that. But yesterday was a good example of a day where he could have made use of that to get some salt down in areas that needed some salt before they could be done by those other groups. So again, that's, you know, a one-time cost because it's not being built in here as a lease option, but it's something we could look at.
So is this a quote Darling's gives?
It is Darling's. This one is Darling's, isn't it? I thought I saw Darling's. They're both Cork? Okay. I just dreamt that it was Darling's. It's Cork.
I think he was gonna look into Darling's too to see if it would be any different, but Cork really, you know, gave us a good pricing. So I think.
So because we're in the midst of our facility study, overall we're really trying to keep our preserve funds to be ready for a bigger picture kind of plan once we have the results of the facility study and have a plan in place. So the net decrease across these lines is $25,000 in building improvements. You see that there are some monies, though, dedicated to improvements at the different buildings, and then contingency is really important to have here in the event that the unexpected happens, which usually it does. So you can see that ASA and OMS, OHS have some improvements planned, and really it's things like some painting, some carpeting, or taking up of carpet and replacing it that's really overdue and needed. So I'm looking for details.
Window replacements that were needed.
The what's that?
Window replacements that were needed.
Yes.
Cafeteria tables.
Yes. We have 2 cafeteria tables that are broken and really need to be replaced.
But the big one is the ropes course, the $12,000 ropes course that was damaged in the storm.
And it wasn't covered by insurance.
Well, we have
It's unknown.
Yeah, we have a request in. We're waiting to hear what, if any, they're going to give us.
Is that even going to be able to be replaced? I mean, I had heard there was some question about what was left actually.
We had somebody come out and look at it, and they gave us a quote to replace it.
That's good.
I mean, it might be slightly different. So we built in 12,000 into this budget for that, but that could be offset substantially by an insurance reimbursement, and that's something that we might know by the time we get further into the budget process.
And that again would be a one-time cost of replacing.
What do we use them?
Mostly outdoor course.
It's been in place here for, I mean, when I was here before, it was, the elements were still being added at that point.
Yeah.
I think it's been intact.
People shooting arrows.
Yeah. And I know that we do, like, didn't our 9th graders do some ropes course elements this year in the back to school? So it's used outside of just the outdoor class, but that's a kind of use.
That's not a good
I'm
idea.
so business teacher. Why did I do that?
Ratings went down, so.
Yeah.
When we start putting staff on the ropes course.
Low ropes.
Test them dropping these devices, like I said.
That's right.
Just give them to the staff. While they're out the ropes.
Questions or comments, suggestions, ideas about that call center?
We're gonna have to see whether we can afford one. There are a lot of one-time costs, and then maybe it's not a good year for one-time costs, since we think about trying to put a bond out next year, and how that would see cover us, but it all makes sense.
So speaking of, bonds and payments, the next line is the retiring of one of our long-term bonds that we've had in place. So that is something that's coming out of the budget to the tune of $81,918 there. So that's, you could look at that as an opportunity to kind of have some savings or to replace that for 1 year with some one-time cost in anticipation of maybe thinking about adding a bond in the future. But those are all scenarios that helps us consider. So the other bond that's there has a number of years left, I think.
We're on 7 of 15 and 8 of 16, so 8 more years.
Halfway there. And then no change in what we're anticipating for the school lunch program. We do have some questionable maintenance needs there that see how it fits into the bigger picture of our facility study.
Makes sense.
So I guess, back to what Brian said as we started this, we would really appreciate feedback at this point. Help us to go back and look at this again with your, is Michelle still there? She came
Yeah,
up.
she's there.
With your feedback and kind of guidance around where you see places that maybe we need to take a look at.
I think for me, it's hard just seeing one side of it to give much guidance.
I mean, when I think about the bottom line that we have to present to the public, there's always two bottom lines. There's the increase in expenses, which is what we have control over. I mean, it's due to contracts we sign and things mostly, but we at least have control over it. It's not the state wagging us, right? And, it's nice that that number is close to inflation, which is about 2%, although it's looking up. But in reality, cost of school education is going faster than inflation is going up. Anyway, so that 5.22% certainly looks big compared to 2%. Although there's nothing on here that I wouldn't like to do. The other is exactly what you said. I mean, in the end, it's the number of the mill rate. It's the change to the mill rate. And it is a little hard to, we don't have the detailed revenue numbers in front of us, but we know what the big pieces are, right? The state piece we know. We went up 100,000. Tuition, we're not going to go for what, 6 weeks?
Yeah.
High school enrollments.
Yeah, I will say that the Glenburn 8th grade went from 54 last year, they were 8th grade of 34 this year. So that's going to be. Yeah.
So if we go with our 26% of all the 8th graders out there, we know it's already going to be
4 or 5 students now right there.
lower.
It's about 90 between VZ, 5, VZ, Milford, Glenburn, Greenbush.
So, I mean, if I were a betting man, I would bet tuition's down 50,000 or 100,000. International students, if I hadn't hold that constant. Do you need any state reimbursement for the bonds and all the folks?
Yeah, but it will be pretty consistent with each year. It's a percent.
Right.
We don't know the exact percent they hold back. But there won't be any huge changes there. So we didn't get one of them that we finished. So
Yeah,
there's
that's
no
what I was
rate.
wondering. So
No.
that revenue is not going to change?
That revenue won't change much.
I'm trying to think if there's any, well, sped tuition, you mentioned.
Well, there'll be the big conversation on how much carryover we want to.
Carryover is a whole conversation, it's a little bit more funding money in some ways than all these others, but absolutely. So plus 100 on the state, minus 50 or 100 on the tuition, high school tuition, plus 30 to 50 sped. Not a big change. So if you look at, let's be really optimistic and say we gain 100 on the revenue side, which is what we're starting at with the state. I don't think we'll be lucky to get there with the tuition numbers, but that's 600,000, so that's 1.4 mil. I haven't done the calculation, but that's not us. And doing that the year before we go and ask them to fund bond is going to be really hard. So, I mean, those are the two numbers to look at. The middle number really, really scary. Frankly, that's mostly the state's fault. 100,000 doesn't even cover our sped and student increases, let alone cost of living increases. So, I mean, we can rather say what we want, but they ain't us sure of the stick again this year. And then the other one that I probably am looking at is actually control, which is our percentage increases. So, if they want to disagree, maybe work really, the budget's increases are going to shrink. So,
take that into account. And then we also have to split in among these increases. We have to take out the ones that we don't have control over. We have to fund those. So that leaves us with a bunch of things that we really want, but that we can control whether or not we get. And those, I think, are what we're going to be looking at. Which of those are going to have to come off the table? For me, again, recognizing that they're all, I mean, there's not a single thing on here that's being proposed that I disagree with. I mean, I think they're all valuable. I think, given that, the one that's at the top of the list for me, in terms of if someone were to say, okay, you can only keep one of these things, I really am very supportive of Reg's plan for STEM at the high school. I think we've got an opportunity here for a variety of reasons to really get a lot out of not a whole lot of additional revenue. And I think if nothing else, I think we have to jump on that. So that would be that's kind of like if someone said, you guys are taking all this stuff away, that would be the last thing I'd want to do away.
And I think the nice thing is the students are seeing it already. You just hear Ben and Becca tonight, and there's just a sense that we have some stuff going on and they're excited about it.
And it just seems a way to keep that going, add to it, and it's going to cost us some, but not a whole lot additional. And if we don't do it now, that same opportunity might not present itself. So that, for me, that's, I guess, where I'm at.
One thing that I wanted to add in that I neglected to mention earlier, and it just dawned on me when we were talking, is the K3 project really is, in large part, wanting to get resources in the classroom, but it's also a way for ASA to eliminate the fixed computer lab they have to really develop a STEM lab at the school. So that's something that I think is important consideration for you to know. And Darcy's built in some, beginning equipment kind of elements into her budget to outfit kind of the start of that. So just wanted to put that out there. Add to that.
We're working on it. We're working on meeting and making a plan, but we're working with Sean and Diana and looking at programming and really needing the technology in the classroom to open up that computer lab space for them.
Sounds like a big win, sure. I mean, nothing, I'm not saying cut anything, but you want me to list the first 5 things I would cut?
That sounds good. I'd like to hear that. First 5 things you would cut, that's what this
First
is?
5 things
Okay.
I would cut,
Okay.
yeah. The OMS teacher, the the iPad and Chromebook, maybe 1 or 2 of the ed tech positions, some more of the PPE costs, half-time custodian, and the truck purchase. I want all those things. I don't, it's just, if we're looking at having to cut $200,000, thinking about, and if the situation changes, if we get a flat rate on health insurance and state bumps us up another 200,000, we could be having a totally different conversation. So I'm not, keep them on the list. I'm not saying we cut them now, but I'm just trying to give perspective. Those are some things I would be looking at.
I think I would mostly concur on that, although I would, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like this Chromebook thing for grade 3 would be a pilot. Is that correct?
So it's a pilot in that we don't have another grade level that's one-to-one Chromebooks.
Okay.
So it's a pilot for us really dipping our toe into something other than a Mac.
And that would allow us to investigate the possibility of making a larger switch.
Yeah.
And Chromebooks are significantly cheaper, is my understanding. Correct? So,
I would also add in, this has to be a pivotal year at grade 3 also because of testing, like Measure Progress, Empower Me, NWEA, those white MacBooks that they're currently using now, they're not gonna last another year. Especially the NWEA has announced that they're coming out with their updated browser and it's not gonna support that.
Yeah.
On that Chromebook right now, you could, in theory, take the NWEA and Empower Me that's already on there and ready to go. So it's higher.
yeah, I think I would agree with Brian's list, although I think I would probably try and decouple the K2 iPads from the grade 2 Chromebooks.
dribbling up and dying on their financial education for the state. They're telling a different story in the newspapers, but you look at the numbers that come across the threshold into our bank account, and they're just,
We're not seeing the results of that.
we are sure not. I mean, $100,000 that they additionally gave us literally barely covers our increases in enrollment and doesn't cover sped increases we already paid for 2 years ago. So it doesn't even begin with the simple cost of living increases that we're supposed to be covering as well, which is most of our increase. Yeah, just, yeah, state's doing terrible things right now.
One thing that I would be interested in is with the sort of there's the 2 vehicle purchases there. I know that there were some cost savings that might be realized from them. If there was a way to kind of detail out, over the next 5 years, it seems like these would save us, to see if they're actually going to save us money, or does it make sense to just do lessons or.
Yeah, like this is the length of the vehicle, this is what we're spending.
This is the leases, this is the mileage reimbursements, this is the surplus miles.
Just because if that could actually save us costs over 5 years, then I think that would make sense. But then if we look at it, with insurance and costs of ownership of the car, if it doesn't, it's just sort of convenient. That puts it in one category, or if it's actually like, this would truly save money.
We'll see what we can put together.
And it's easier to justify selling.
Some of that's an unknown.
Yeah.
Because we're not exactly sure what, but, I mean, we can come up with our best guess.
Just truly like an estimate,
This
yeah.
is wrong, we just need a best guess.
Then the other thing, like I talked about, that we've done in the past, what we're contractually obligated to, what we can't. You know what I mean? Narrow it down, like Mark was saying, narrowing it down to things we can choose from and things we can't choose.
So that sheet, like where we have the top, these are, and then down here, here's things to consider. And then we also came up with, some creative ways to still do some of the things that we wanted to do that without, necessarily adding to the budget. We did some shuffling, and so those kind of things will be coming as we learn more information about everything.
And I'm still hoping that the transportation costs for the UTC will get sorted out as they flesh out this legislature change. I mean,
I'm really optimistic on that one. But
Yeah,
I think we do control the $21,000 side of things. I think there will be pushback from our region of being assessed more.
Yeah.
Even though and as a region, we've gotten the short end of the stick.
I think there's still a lot of movement that could happen there, and hopefully will.
There's less movement than there's less movement than there would have been last year, but it was still kind of, so we have to remember this is one of those years where there's potentially less movement. There's still some, for sure, but there's
Well,
not as
I'm
much
just
as
hoping
there
since
was.
this is like something they haven't really truly quite sorted out, it seems like they just kind of threw this CTE thing out there.
It's never clear which of these were actually embedded in the legislation, and which of these are administrative rules that came in from the legislation, so. Administrative rule, because it's really.
There's also, in some ways, there's less willingness.
Right, because of man stuff, but, yeah. I mean, as far as the format, this was great, really.
Yeah, this was very extremely.
As far, I'm trying to think, we're not meeting again until last week in February, it's great, but.
I think that's good though, because it'll allow us to get
More
more, I mean, because
yeah.
there's a huge kind of, I don't wanna say it's wasted time or sunk cost, but we spend a huge amount of time kind of going over stuff and we have less than ideal information, so in some ways it's probably better for us. Well, there'll be more pieces filled in, when we meet on February 27th, there'll be less uncertainty, more pieces filled in, hopefully it's good. either way, we'll know more. It'll allow us to sharpen our discussion and decision. So normally, I would agree that it's a long time.
No, I agree, it's good. As far as what my proposal is, what I would like to see is the sheet items, either italic or non-italic, mandatory versus optional. And some numbers on those salary and benefit increases that come in, but, and then I would like to see, I think this might start with recommendations. Maybe a guess, I know we're not gonna have the enrollments, but we can just agree, we guess any enrollments are going down.
So at this point, I could put in the 26% of the eighth graders that we know are out there.
Yeah, that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Way to do it for now.
Which will be significantly lower.
Yeah.
Because our senior class, I think, is around 30.
Yeah.
So in order to come in even would be 30.
Yeah.
So, we'll have revenues ready. Yeah. The first round of revenues.
And the number,
That would happen that year, because our eighth grade class is supposed to be before the year when all the classes are going to be.
Yeah. That happens, and then you have like
then
the
it
sixth
rebounds.
graders.
Yeah.
Generally tied to economic bad times, like 9 months pre.
I mean, so if we had this just font to indicate what's mandatory and some other salary and benefit things that we have already contracted to do, and first cut revenue, I think we have to be quick convert on those. Teach 70,000 less in tuition, but weeks.
I think we might go back into co-curricular and add some of the other cost factors there, just so you can see them, because there are some items in that line that are probably more helpful for you to see.
I'm gonna hold out some hope that our yield on these two, the number is smaller, but our yield's gonna go up.
Ours is gonna take up to 30%.
Absolutely.
So you're saying the 26% is gonna be wrong?
It's gonna be the best step up day ever.
No, I think we can still get 30. 30, if we're good feedback.
We'll get a $100 visa gift.
It's cost effective.
Especially like 96
That
out
my
there.
banner for my big ideas.
Just follow the project.
Gonna get us all thrown in jail.
Yeah, the only thing could be worse is if you said we were using federal funds for that.
And you are Mike Light. I have nothing to do with it, I'm gonna give you.
So does that sound like a plan as far as next steps? And, I mean, I asked, and I'm glad that you put out the full, I'm sure there are all things on here, but I'm glad you put out more than we're gonna end up with. So it can be a conversation if when it comes to cuts, you don't start cutting that, but, I think this is a good start, so I would just like to thank the whole admin team for, one piece of paper represents a lot of hours, so, thank you for the great work on it, and I don't know if this is even a wood anymore, but we'll knock on wood that,
No, there's no wood.
article board, I think. And we'll hope that everything we get right moves in the right direction. Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
You said up 4.5 hours.
Better, that was impressive on your.
Yeah, I think cranking.
Statement is just. I mean, it was. This education lost at the end of the July budget last year, but the way it's come down is even worse. We still have a quorum. We're just on first reads on policies and contracts, nothing big.
My kids are like,
Totally.
10 minutes, like, where are you? I
Are they giving you rude emojis?
They wrote they were going to bed, but then they kept writing and saying, but now where are you?
Yeah, you should do it. It's not a big deal at all right now, so. Policies are up next, if you want discussion policies.
It's freezing.
Oh, see, yeah, I paid off that one I really wanted to try to change.
No, I did. Does anyone want me to turn the heat back on?
What heat?
The one that was blowing and making all the noise earlier.
I'm fine either way.
Still have Michelle? Yeah.
Are we taking a break right now?
For
Anyone
about,
there?
yeah, about 10 more seconds.
Okay.
My apologies.
Okay, so we dropped staff nominations, there are none. Next up are policies. So we'll consider as a unit JLF, which oddly enough is not a required policy, so it had not been on my radar, but we do not have a policy in this area at the moment. And it's obviously, I mean, one level it's just repeating state law, but I think it's an important topic that we make sure we have a policy in place. This has been through the policy subcommittee. The big change is that teachers have become mandatory reporters. So in the past, the policy was they would come and talk to the principal, and the principal would report. But now, every teacher, for that matter, every staff member is a mandatory reporter. So they report directly to Department of Health and Human Services. And then the other issue, which has become a fairly big issue in recent years, is institutional accountability. So this has happened especially at university levels where one employee was making bad decisions about, typically about one of their own employees. And so making sure that things are accountable through the entire institution. So this is now mandatory reporting to DHHS and then reporting to the principal and putting a written form which gets filed in the school in the superintendent's office is the basic intent of the policy as it stands currently. I think Reg and Darcy were both there at the policy subcommittee meeting. This is a first read. I think we're going to cut at it one more time, but I think everybody was captured everything that we talked about. I think everybody's happy with it as it stands. And so unless there's any discussion, I would just motion to recognize a first read on both the policy JLF and the form that's attached to it, JLFE.
I will second.
Any further discussion? So we'll hit this once more on policy subcommittee, and then this will come to the board for second read. We can need to vote. All those in favor? Okay.
We did JLFE as well.
Did it as a package, yep. Okay, the next one is IKE. This is a required policy. This is the one we had intentionally not done last year, somewhat with guidance from the state, because it was all going to change with proficiency-based diplomas. And nothing has changed really with proficiency-based diplomas, but on this particular policy, but it's time to get it on the books. So this is the criteria basically for deciding when kids switch a grade level. Promotion going up a grade level, or retention not advancing a grade level, or acceleration skipping a grade level. Again, this was at the policy subcommittee, Reg and Darcy, as well as myself and Mark and Meredith, all, and Holly, yeah, that's right, Holly, I left her off on the other one too, all went through it. We decided the high schools don't really have grades, so we got rid of a lot of verbiage related to that. High school just has graduation standards. But other than that, this is the default MSMA policy, which is similar to what we had on the books 3 or 4 years ago. So I will make a motion to recognize a first read on policy IKE. Is there a second?
I will second.
Is there any discussion? All those in favor? Okay. Next up is the E-rate contract. You have a copy in front of you. So this should sound familiar. A couple board meetings ago, Sean came to us with a proposal, more or less asking us to commit. This is the cost sharing, so we spend $55,000. We get another $55,000 from the state. That money is likely probably going away, so it's now or never. And this goes into network routers and capacity. So we had given him the guidance and made a motion to go ahead and negotiate a contract. This is the contract that has come back to us. It is a over $25,000 contract, so it does need to be approved and signed by the board. So I will start with a motion to adopt the contract as presented. Is there a second?
I will second.
Okay. Discussion. I had one question. Have our lawyers looked at the contract?
We have not,
Okay.
so we will have Pete take a look at it if you're supportive of it.
Yeah. I think I would like to have a lawyer take a look at it. So I guess I would be supportive of it. We're probably still going to need a board vote on a final contract.
Okay, so.
Is
you
that
need
a
us to bring it
problem?
back?
Is that a problem to
I think we
wait?
could bring it back February 27th, because you need it by March.
Yeah,
right?
beginning of March, preferably. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
when the 471 window closes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if we vote on this on the 27th, if we vote on this on the 27th, we're still fine?
It's gonna be close.
But we're fine.
I'd like to say yeah.
What's your
Well, because
deadline?
how this works is that we pay an E-rate consultant that they take a look at the contract too, and they're gonna say yes, this makes sense for E-rate, or we need to go back to E&A and say this doesn't make sense. And that the final contract has to be to USAC by March. I think it's March 5th right now, to verify the funds and making sure that this is gonna go through.
So could we do the E-rate review of the contract in parallel with our lawyer review of the contract?
Yes.
Do them at the same time?
Yep.
So that everything's done and ready to be sealed on the 27th?
Yep.
Yeah, I think we should do that, and then if for some reason that we do that and there's still a problem, we could always, nobody wants to do it, we could always schedule a special or emergency meeting if absolutely necessary.
Right.
But I think if we do these two things in parallel, then that should solve that problem.
Does everybody agree that we should pay a lawyer to look at this? Just, I think when it's
I
a
do.
6-figure contract, we should pay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The thing I will know, it's not it's interesting to explain. It's not a true 6-figure contract because we're not going to pay that full 6 figures because they're going to do the SPY method of
Right.
actual billing. So we're not going to pay that and then get reimbursed. They're going to go to USAC to get the amount that they would get owed.
Right.
And so we'd pay the.
Well, even if it's a $55,000 contract,
Yeah.
I think that's something I'd like to have a lawyer look at. Everybody agree? All right, so actually, I'm going to just withdraw my motion. You clearly have the support of the board to proceed.
Yep.
Okay.
We'll get lawyer review and feedback and bringing this back February 27th.
Okay.
Same time that the E-rate consultant is also.
Yes.
Yeah. So the E-rate consultant's already kind of started taking a look at it because before I sent it to Meredith, he looked at it. But he's going to take one more look and then get back to me hopefully sometime before the end of this week to give me some final notes of things we need to, if we need to address anything, change anything, so.
Okay. Great.
All right, great.
Okay, next up, subcommittee reports. Policy subcommittee, you know what we're doing. We're going to do those 2 policies again at the next subcommittee meeting. And we may get one more policy in, but we're not going to meet before the next board meeting, so the next policies will be coming at the 1st of March.
Okay.
Yep, I have to check the timing.
Right.
Whether we actually meet, is the policy subcommittee meeting before the next board meeting? We may have to special schedule a policy subcommittee meeting to keep things moving then. The third is putting us, anyway, we can do this through email, but we might want to get one in before the next, we don't want to wait till after the next two board meetings to meet again. All right, UTC, Aaron is not available to report, but we heard the core topic, which is the budget from the state. Spruce?
Yep, we have a meeting Thursday night, which I will be in attendance for.
Great. Curriculum Subcommittee this Thursday.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. Facilities, we haven't done anything since last week. Everybody push our chili supper on the 28th.
When's our banner going up?
We're getting it, it's being made, it'll be up on Friday.
It's up on Friday? Yeah, forward on Friday.
All right.
I have a question. Should I attend at 6 o'clock for that chili supper meeting, and will somebody have a computer so I can attend?
Can you eat chili via computer?
Yeah. So Sean's hopefully listening in. So can you coordinate that with Sean? Michelle?
I can't really hear what everyone's saying.
Yeah, we'll make sure you work with Sean to have a computer at 6 o'clock.
Okay. Great.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody have other business? Future agenda items? Public comment, is there any public comment? Seeing no public comment, our next board meeting is the 27th of February, 2018, 6 o'clock here in the Town Council chambers. I guess technically we need to advertise the February 28th as a board meeting as well. Since we'll have more than a quorum, which is, I'm sure you were thinking that already why it's here. But we will advertise that. I don't know if we have, well, we probably do have to put the chili in too if there are 5 board members on it. It's going to be an unusual agenda.
I was just wondering, what is the form?
I don't need any, so.
What's the form gonna be like for the, the facilities forum? Anyway, how's it gonna be set up for the meeting and so forth?
So we're in the process of working out that with the architects and with the facilities committee. So we could probably, well, I guess we're not meeting until the day before, but not unlike the other brainstorming sessions that have been going on in terms of kind of the topics that will be discussed, but the scale potentially of figuring out if we have a large turnout, looking at more small group discussions and then report out from that, and then doing some kind of prioritization at the end with kind of the DOT exercise around where priorities are in the group. So I know that's just a quick overview, but
Yeah. So it's not just all sitting down and
it's not just sit and listen, it's actually trying to solicit as much participation and input from those in attendance as possible.
Okay.
I don't know if, Brian, if you would change anything.
No, small group discussions. I think the questions are basically going to be what's working about the schools, what's not working about the buildings in the schools.
I'd like to be able to get something to maybe put out.
Yeah, talk to me.
Yep. Yep. Are there any requests for information or follow-up? Okay, motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Thank you, everybody. I know.
I think it was fairly efficient given what we did tonight.
I feel bad about the contract.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, Michelle.
Yeah, and I as well, so my.
As long as they proceed along, Carol